Hello and welcome back to Out of This World, and Based Lit Analyzer is back with me. We're going to be doing Pan Part 2, and we have a fantastic show for you tonight. Last week we were talking all about Peter Pan, and the God Pan and Dionysus and Bacchus and mystery schools and how those went into theater and the Greek mystery plays and how that all became popular culture today. Movies, plays, songs, all of that stuff was initiatory practices of the ancient world into cults and learning how to invoke gods into yourself and do things in your god form. So that's what we're going to learn about tonight. And last time we defined Pan, and we were talking about how Pan means all, universal. It is the Om. So when you say Om Mani Padme Om, that's Pan. And any region withdrawn and without the range of waking consciousness. And then we talked a little about Nodens, which we're going to talk about right now with the Great God Pan book by Arthur Machen. And another word I wanted to bring up out of the glossary of this book about the hidden god Pan is called the Night of Pan, or NOX. So in Thelema, this is like when you lose your ego, right? It's called the Night of Pan, and it's part of being reborn by the goddess of Babylon. There you go. The Life of Aleister Crowley. Does he talk about that in there?
Yes, he does. Yes. Yeah. The OTO rituals. And I'm sorry to cut you off here. Yeah, it was interesting because I know we're going to get into the Great God Pan here. And this was a crazy book.
It was so crazy.
Oh man, it's a crazy book.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like you said, it's like a detective story / Poe. It reminded me of Poe's Murders in the Rue Morgue, which is like the first detective story. And the way that the narrative is set up, but the revelation of Pan, of seeing Pan, in this sort of hell night that leaves these people with this horror-struck look on their face is pretty stark. It's a pretty crazy book.
It's very much like a Rosemary's Baby of Victorian era, right?
Because very much, yeah.
Yeah, we'll get into that real fast. But okay, so the NOX, which the OX is part of the Mark of the Beast in Thelema, right? It's the phallus and the lady part. The X and the O fused together is what they call the Mark of the Beast. The beast is Pan, or an amalgam of a lot of different things. It's the alchemical Baphomet, which looks a lot like Pan. Pan also is related to the Baphomet through the goat of Mendes, the cult of Mendes in Egypt. And he is related to the god Min of Egypt, and you can always identify Min by his his hot dog parts,
right?
Yeah. It's very easy to see what's going on with Min. But so in this Night of Pan, they call it in Thelema and the OTOs, is a mystical state that represents the state of ego death and the process of spiritual attainment, right? And then in the AA, they talk about, getting in touch with your holy and guardian angel, and you have to cross the abyss, and you meet Choronzon, and to escape the abyss, you have to pour out your blood in the cup of Babylon and be reborn again from Babylon and Pan. So now that you're initiate in these Crowleyan Thelemic orders, you are a child of Pan, right?
Yeah, there are two parts in this book. This is Lawrence Sutton's Life of Aleister Crowley. I did a 2-part stream on this book. There are 2 parts that are pretty brief that talk about Pan. And one, of course, is talking about the hymn to Pan, which was read at Crowley's as Crowley's eulogy at his funeral in Hastings. But just briefly, it's talking about the AA. What's the AA? The
Argentium Astrum.
Right. The silver
The
the
silver
silver
star.
serpent.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is in the remember that was in the ninth gate also. Remember?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, when she had that tattoo. It talks about well, it's talking about the rights of this is about Victor Neuberg. This is when Crowley like went to the desert with
Mhm.
Victor Neuberg and horrified him. It says Neuberg in turn was assigned the draining task and act of magical equilibration of hurling himself into physical movements such as to dance down the gods, which is similar to what you're talking about here.
Mhm.
There was tragically a lasting cost to pay, which one may attribute to the magical efficacy of the rites or to the strength of Neuberg's belief in them as one likes. According to Neuberg, during one performance of the Rite of Luna, this is the Rite of Luna, Crowley forgetfully failed to pronounce the words to release Neuberg from his possession by the lunar planetary spirit, and Neuberg tried to remedy the damage by later pronouncing the words himself, but to no avail. This is when he drove the guy crazy in the desert. And
That's a
then
really sad story too in real
it
life,
is, yeah.
what he did to that boy.
Yes, and it talks about the also the rights of Eleusis,
Hmm.
which was fleshed out in August and September 1910. AA membership was expanded with this, and then this is leading into in the rites of Pan. The cup of libation was passed exclusively amongst the participating AA members on stage. It's possible, but not certain, that it contained peyote, and then it goes on to talk about Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, and then let's see, on page 234 here, he talks about OTO, and the two most memorable works of the summer were the Hymn to Pan and the Gnostic Mass that he created. So he composed his own poems to Pan, tied in with OTO when he was creating this Gnostic Mass, which is tied in with what was the one that he did at Loch Ness, the rights that he couldn't he stopped in the middle of, and that so it was, remember he did this mass in the middle of his hall on Loch Ness, which burned just a
Hmm.
few years ago, and
And
then they
didn't
said,
Led or somebody bought that manor, like Led
yeah, it was
Zeppelin or
Jimmy.
something?
Yeah,
And
it was Jimmy Page bought it. Jimmy Page bought that, and he bought the Equinox bookstore and all of Crowley's esoteric. All of his it has the largest book collection of Crowley's. He also owned Crowley's, one of his estates on the Thames,
uh-huh.
outside of London. But the house burned a few years ago, and then of course they said Loch Ness was created. The Loch Ness monster was a product of his of one of his Gnostic masses.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
um,
So and you mentioned Pompeii last time,
mhm,
and I found this picture of Pan from Pompeii. Can you see that?
yeah, yeah.
Pretty graphic. Him and a goat.
Yes. And actually that ties in to Ovid, which, because the book, The Great God Pan, and also what you were just talking about with the OTO rights, takes its cue from Ovid's Metamorphosis. So in book one, because oh my God, there's so much with this. So the OTO rights and The Great God Pan led me to the poem by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, which is about Pan walking along the banks of the river and then picking the reeds.
Hmm.
And then that is from Ovid's Metamorphosis, and it's the myth where Pan is walking along and sees Syrinx and attempts to rape her, and then she turns into a reed,
Mm-hmm.
right, in the river. So then that's where he gets his panpipes.
Oh.
So when he plays the panpipes, it's supposed to be a recreation of the myth of his act of rape of Syrinx.
And so did he kill her then in the story?
Well,
Like
here's
if she was a reed, did he chop her down and make pipes out of her?
here's what it says. So it
Okay.
says it's I'll try to paraphrase, because it's not that long, but I'll try to paraphrase this part. It says Mercury told this story. This is in book one of Ovid. It says, in the chill mountains of Arcadia, there lived a nymph, the most famous of all the wood nymphs of Nonacris. The other nymphs called her Syrinx. Many a
Mhm.
time she had eluded the pursuit of satyrs and other spirits who haunt the shady woodlands of the fertile fields. She was a follower of the Ortygian goddess, imitating her in her pastimes and in her virtue too. When she had her garments caught up out of the way for hunting, as Diana wears hers, she could easily have been mistaken for Leto's daughter. save that her bow was of horn, Diana's of gold, and even in spite of this, she used to be taken for the goddess. As she was returning from Mount Lycaeus, Pan caught sight of her. Pan, who wears on his head a wreath of sharp-leaved pine, and he spoke these words. Mercury still had to tell what Pan said to the nymph, and how she, scorning his prayers, ran off through the pathless forest till she came to the still waters of sandy Ladon. When the river halted her flight, she prayed her sisters of the stream to transform her. And when Pan thought that he had at last caught hold of Syrinx, he found that instead of the nymph's body, he held a handful of marsh reeds. As he stood sighing, the wind blew through the reeds and produced a thin, plaintive sound. The god was enchanted by this new device and by the sweetness of the music. You and I shall always talk together so, he cried. And then he took reeds of unequal length and fastened them together with wax. These preserved the girl's name. So that's how he gets his panpipe, by the attempted roip of this nymph.
Yeah.
Who transforms. Oftentimes in the myths, people will transform into various like natural objects, the trees or whatever, to escape, a body harm or bodily justice. And then so Pan recreates his, with playing the music, playing her as the music.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that's not the only story in Greek mythology where, like you said, they're trying to get away from the rape of the gods, like especially Zeus.
Right.
And they turn into a bull or something else, or even the story Medusa, the snake-headed lady, she was just trying to avoid some non-consensual intimacy.
Right.
Right. And that's how she got her snake head. So
yeah, the pantheon is full of perverts.
Right?
For sure. For sure.
Yeah. And so we're talking about Pan. He is the taker of innocence, literally, right? He represents virility, fecundity, transformation. They call him both the giver and taker of life. So he can be a representation of abundant nature, or nature that destroys, like a storm, a flood, or whatever. He's all of it. Right?
He's all. Yes, he's all.
Yeah.
And that's mentioned in the Great God Pan, in the book as well. There's a part of him being the giver and the taker. And that, of course, would tie in with the OTO ritual, right? With the yoni and the Crowley and stuff.
Yes, exactly. Yoni, good word. Okay. So let's get right into it. The Great God Pan, this was written in 1890. And it was kind of fun because it's like, it's written in the style of, antique Blair Witch Project or something, where it's found manuscripts and diaries, and so found footage and plus a little narration mixed together, but you really have to read closely and put all the clues together to figure out who is what and what's going on.
Yeah, you do, especially with like the Latin epigraphs that are sort of sprinkled throughout, and then you realize that by wanting to because they give you no translation, so by the act of translating it yourself, then you realize that you're tied into the narrative and into the detective story.
Good point. I did go and translate it myself. I put all those Latin words in Google and it got it. So Machen, the author of this, Arthur Machen, H.P. Lovecraft admired him, Edgar Allan Poe. He was good friends with A.E. Waite of the famous Golden Dawn and the Tarot deck. He did not join the Golden Dawn, however, and this book is more of a critique, actually, of like the libertine writers like Oscar Wilde and people like that.
Yeah, so he would be a contemporary of Wilde for sure. There's something that's inherent in a lot of these especially the late 19th century writers, where they have a Poe sort of cadence to the way that they write. I mean, Poe died in 1849, but you can see that even Poe takes his sort of cadence from, like, he's trying to write formally, but he'll reuse diction. He'll reuse specific terms throughout stories. But I see there's some of William Wilson in this as well, which William Wilson is Poe's short story about a doppelganger. A guy follows a guy around a city and literally meets himself in the city. And there's a lot of there's a lot of, I don't know, phenomenological and phantasmagorical images in this that are straight out of even the way that he, in the 19th century, you would write MS for manuscript. I found the MS,
Uh-huh.
right? It's
Yeah,
the
oh yeah. Yeah,
yes.
totally. So in this, we're gonna see some Platonic ideas of the spirit world beyond the veil being more real than the real world, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And we talked about that last time. So like you think of that um old artwork of the alchemist piercing the veil. He's got his head outside and his foot in the mundane world, but he can see the whole galaxy. This is what we're going to be talking about in this book. So the world of the phenomena that we can see, they're going to explain the first chapter that this is a pale shadow of the world of ideas, right? And you can transcend the world of shadows and directly access the world of ideas through certain magic rituals. And Dr. Raymond, this is what he attempts to do through science, what the ceremonial magician would try to be doing with magic circles and spells.
Right, which is very 19th century, right?
Totally.
It's just
Yeah, it's very metropolis too, right?
yeah, tying in science and the occult into one thing. And you always get the scientists who want to experiment with their own things, by the way, in this. It's like in Bram Stoker's Dracula, even in the book where, the doctor is inside and he's like, well, I had to give Renfield, a strong magical dose of morphine, which I then administered to myself just for good measure.
Yeah. Yeah. So they're trying to directly access this like Neoplatonic world, the one, through the brain, through modification of the brain. And we're also going to see some Victorian ideas of horror, which would be de-evolution. So this is when evolution was just coming into its peak, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so the opposite of that would be a horror, de-evolving back into animal or amoeba or slime or muck, right?
Right.
Like Kafka or something, going back into a cockroach.
Into the cockroach, right? Yeah.
So yeah, these are letters and diaries and a little bit of narrative. So let's get right in it. So it starts out this young man, Mr. Clark, is visiting this old doctor, this old scientist, right?
Yeah.
And the old scientist is telling the young man, I have devoted myself to transcendental medicine.
Right.
And some people think I'm a quack and a charlatan and an imposter, but he thinks he's on the right path. So right away we have, Dr. Frankenstein.
Yes.
Rotwang. Who else archetype can you think of?
Well, definitely Frankenstein, because this is like a huge section of the Frankenstein novel, because the young man, Victor Frankenstein at the beginning, first he suffers this traumatic shock of his mother dying, and then he goes and he's apprenticed to this alchemist, and he's learning the secrets of the universe through alchemy, but it's a secret. This is a secret knowledge, and it's tied, it's sort of in the language of scientific research. And then he discovers electricity. And then he starts playing. There's a large section of the book where he's playing around with in the morgue, and he starts assembling body parts. And when I did the analysis of that, I saw it as, again, my take with that whole novel was that people will often say, like when you go to the Halloween party and it's like, well, I'm Frankenstein, and they're like, no, that was the doctor, you're the monster. Yeah. But in the book, it's made clear to me that there's a fusion. There's a split. So he goes through a sort of electroshock therapy that he administers on himself, and he splits into this beast man that he then reassembles spiritually and in terms of the body parts into this other creature. So the rest of the novel is spent chasing himself. He's trying to find his own psyche. And oftentimes in movies, they'll show it that, Frankenstein looks out the window and he's in the Arctic and he sees a beast running, but you never see that there are never other characters present when he does that. So it's like, to me, it's like we're getting a mirror, a window into himself where, for instance, when he kills people, he doesn't realize that it's just his alter doing it. But suffice it to say, how is it related to this? Well, again, we have somebody who is, it's the secret hidden knowledge, and it's tied in with science, and we're going to find the secrets to the universe through this, revealed through the newest, scientific methods. And one thing, not to give anything away with this, but one thing that I really like about this book is that it sort of plays on what is truly horrific. One is the unknown, and the sort of spiritual element of encountering something in the, I mean, he mentions the abyss many times in this, encountering an other. And the other is the look on a person's face when they've encountered such a thing. So we don't need extraneous elements to deal with that. We just see the look of shock on the person's face, and that's enough to horrify the onlookers in the book.
And at the end of chapter 1, that's exactly what happened. So the look on her face was terrifying, right?
Yes. He says, yes, said the doctor. It's a great pity. She is a hopeless idiot.
Yes.
However, it could not be helped. And after all, she has seen the great god Pan.
Right. So part of this is madness, just like when you see the abyss, or when you do these magic rituals like you were talking about, and you do it incorrectly, you can lose your mind. So, and this is all having to do with the ideas of the Matrix also, like, because they're talking about the real world is just this matrix that we can manipulate, like Neo, if we can pierce the veil and see the god Pan.
Yeah, if you could break on through to the other side, man.
Right. Exactly. And so he does this procedure. He says, a slight lesion in the gray matter, that is all. Oh, and let's not forget, the person that he is experimenting on is his servant girl.
Of course.
Right? An orphan who he raised in his household, so he thinks that he can do whatever he pleases with her anatomy. So he says, a slight lesion in the gray matter is all a trifling rearrangement of certain cells, a microscopical alteration that would escape the attention of 99 brain specialists out of 100. So we're already getting into like Monarch MK Ultra stuff.
Yes.
Splitting the psyche. Also, that reminds me of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So these type of psychic fractures are older than even World War II.
Yeah, it's in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I can't help but think that that Lewis Jolly and West read this book and was like, oh yeah, this is it, baby. This is what I want to do. Norm Macdonald had a good joke about the guy who invented the lobotomy, where he said that this great scientific hero died 100 years ago today. He invented a procedure where he made a slight slit into the gray matter and scrambled the brains. He'll be sorely missed, right?
Yeah.
This guy's a total monster.
Right.
And you certainly see that, like we said, in Frankenstein, in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And I just did this chaos stream about CIA and Charles Manson, where Lewis Jolly and West is Tom O'Neill sort of implies that it's Lewis Jolly and West who did these experiments on the ones that we know about, right? Which is like when he met with Jack Ruby and Charlie Manson, but also with these other characters like this guy Jimmy Shaver, who had done this horrible thing he'd done a horrible thing on at Lackland Air Force Base, and it turns out that he had probably been a patient of Lewis Jolly and West before that, even though they bring in Jolly and West to check him out psychologically afterwards, and then they look for the files, and his last name Shaver and the S files seem to be missing.
Of course.
So right. There's a great, I just want to point out on page 4, like the language of this is really great, because on page 4 he sort of mentions he has a way of mixing Shakespeare and later Crowley. Crowley would read this, and this is Crowley's MO.
Well, I think there's a coded name for him in this in a couple minutes. I'll see if you agree with me.
So Al Cowley.
No. It was something like that.
Yes.
Oswald Crolius.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, Crowley did have, he had a number of names, right? Perturabo, Master Therian, but I feel like Oswald was one of them. And also I can picture him writing he always had like phallic and yoni signatures in his pervert signature and the way he wrote his name. But on page 4 here, it says, people should read this book. It's very short. It says, I stood here one evening. It was a summer evening, and the valley looked much as it does now. It's bottom of page 4. I stood here and saw before me the unutterable, the unthinkable gulf that yawns profound between two worlds, the world of matter and the world of spirit. I saw the great empty deep stretch dim before me, and in that instant a bridge of light leapt from the earth to the unknown shore, and the abyss was spanned.
Yeah.
That's Miltonian. I mean, that's Miltonian language.
Mm,
That's Satan crossing the abyss. And then later with Crowley talking about meeting Karanzan.
yes. And later on, it's going to connect to Nodens, the god of the abyss.
Right, right. Is that the goat? Is that the goat man you talked about last week? The goat fish?
No, that's Capricorn.
Oh, yeah. That gave me the creepy
Um,
crawlies, folks.
so Nodens is known for his lightning flash. And what I got in my mental imagery when he was talking about that is the synapses between brain cells use electricity to communicate and fire to, you know what I mean? So what he's seeing is a great expanse. It could be a giant brain with the electrical impulses going between
Right.
synapses and connecting those. And that's what he thinks he's going to do with this operation.
Yeah, and you're so right. Page 6 of the book. You see that parchment Oswald Crowlius? Right.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
was and then he says, but to justify that it's not just a random name thrown in, because inevitably somebody will say, well, what's that have to do with Crowley?
Right.
No, he says he was one of the first to show me the way, although I don't think he ever found it himself. That is a strange saying of his. In every grain of wheat there lies hidden the soul of a star, which is
Yeah.
like every man and every woman is a star.
That's exactly what
That's great. Wow, that's good find. Good
yeah.
find, Jamie.
So Dr. Raymond, the mad scientist, has invited this young man named Mr. Clark to witness this brain surgery. Dr. Raymond fancies himself like a sort of pioneer, really, like a psychonaut delving into the abyss of gray matter and nerve cells in the brain. And he says, I'm perfectly instructed as to the possible functions of those nerve centers. With a touch, I can say, I can set free the current. With a touch, I can complete the communication between this world of sense and ... So he's already talking about manipulating your perception of this world and the spirit world by brain surgery.
Right.
Right. And he said,
which is a lot like, I mean, Jay and I did Wizard of Oz and Return to Oz. And it seems like Return to Oz especially is like a metaphor, uses that as a kind of metaphor. Like the lightning storm is the electroshock table that they put her on at the beginning. We see like lightning flashes. They're manipulating the brain, going into another world, piercing the veil. That's a good point.
And so he says, it will level utterly the solid wall of sense, and probably for the first time since man was made, a spirit will gaze on a spirit world. Clark, Mary will see the god Pan. And then this is so weird. I don't know if you caught this, but the next sentence right after that, it says, Clark is talking to Dr. Raymond, and Clark says, but you remember what you wrote to me. I thought it would be requisite that she... And he stops. And he whispered the rest into the doctor's ear, and they never go back, or they never say what was the requisite that she... I don't know if they're talking about her being a virgin or something.
Yeah, I suppose that would be it.
Right. So he says, the doctor says, oh, never mind about that. It's better as it is. I'm certain of that. So this might be a clue when it comes out later that, well, we'll get to that. Okay, so just keep that in your mind, right? Because they never explain that. And then he talks about how he rescued this girl from the gutter, from certain starvation when she was a child. I think her life is mine to use as I see fit. So there is his moral compass right there.
Right, and which, by the way, ties into Peter Pan.
Oh, good point.
Right, because we're talking about orphans. And Peter Pan chasing his own shadow, flying from the, I guess you could say, the figurative world of Neverland, or the other world across the ocean, back into, the big smoke, London, through the window, and then chasing his own shadow. And he's an orphan, and that ties in with, Hook, which we're going to talk about. I know, it plays a big. That's a major part of the motif in that film.
Yeah.
The orphanage.
So they do talk about that the operating table was a stone slab.
Oh my
Like, how much
God.
more horrific can
Look,
this get, right? Like,
right.
and then when the doctor's mixing together the anesthesia or whatever, it gave this like super odd odor that
Yeah.
reminded Clark of a encounter that he had with the devil or with Pan
Mm.
when he was young. So here's the theme that Pan is a generational thing because Peter Pan comes to visit you generation after generation,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. And Hook said, remember Hook says that Captain Hook says that I'm going to keep coming back to you generation after generation to all of
Oh
your
yeah.
children. Yeah, if you go to the doctor's office and you smell, listen, folks, I went to the doctor's office. I smelled sulfur and brimstone. It was terrible. I said to myself, why is my doctor putting me on a stone slab with spirals all around? It's very strange. It's very odd. I said to myself, yeah, maybe
Right?
that's not the right doctor.
Oh, I forgot we're going to talk about Pan's Labyrinth tonight.
Yeah, because the same thing occurs in that.
Yes.
Yes.
So Clark, he passes out because of the smell of the like chemicals, and he dreams of the day that he met Pan when the temperature was so tropical, and he dreamt of uh, a moment in time he stood face to face with a presence. It was neither man nor beast, neither living nor dead,
Right.
but all things mingled, the form of all things, but devoid of all form. And in that moment, the sacrament of body and soul was dissolved, and a voice seemed to cry, "Let us go hence." And then the darkness of darkness beyond the stars, the darkness of everlasting.
Mm,
So
yeah.
there's your night of Pan, right?
Yeah. He is this where he ends up on the bottom of page 8? There's
Mhm.
this great part where he says, let me turn my mic a little. He says, in the wood, I know you haven't gotten to this part, but Clark in the deep folds of dream was conscious that the path from his father's house had led him to the undiscovered country. So when he says the undiscovered country, that's a Hamlet reference.
Mm.
From whence no traveler returns. He's talking about death there.
Uh-huh.
The undiscovered country, and he was so. But continuously in this, it's the metaphor that you see Pan at the moment of ecstasy before death, and then you go into the great beyond of death, which is the shimmering abyss of hell, I suppose. In this,
Yeah.
um, when suddenly, in place of the hum and murmur of the summer, an infinite silence seemed to fall on all things, and the wood was hushed. Of course, it's the wood because Pan lives in the wood. And for a moment in time, he stood face to face there with a presence that was neither man nor beast, neither the living nor dead, but all things mingled, the form of all things, but devoid of all form. And
Mhm.
in that moment, the sacrament of body and soul was dissolved, and the voice seemed to cry, "Let us go hence." Yeah, that's great. Yeah, you just read the part about "Let us go hence,"
Yeah.
um, and it gives way to the most awful terror.
Mhm.
God,
Yeah, so he brings the girl in for the procedure, and Clark is waking up from his vision,
yeah,
and he brings her in. Her name's Mary, of course,
yeah,
right? Virgin
yes,
Mary,
yeah.
but maybe not. And then the doctor's like, "Are you willing to trust yourself to me entirely?" And she says, "Oh, yes, of course. Give me a kiss before you begin." And so the doctor kisses her. So this is weird stuff going on between Mary and an old psychonaut doctor. Um,
Yes. This reminds me of, have you seen that movie A Dangerous Method
no.
by David Cronenberg? It's about Freud and Jung and their relationship with each other, Viggo Mortensen and Michael Fassbender. And Michael Fassbender gets this patient who's Keira Knightley, and she's like this. She's like a schizophrenic orphan,
Mhm.
and he ends up doing pervert things.
What's it called?
It's called A Dangerous Method.
Okay.
It's a pretty good film. I mean, it's a you know, the whole thing centers around his perversion with this patient of his, but he's like,
Yeah.
oh, it's therapeutic that I enact the things that she wants me to enact.
Yeah.
Oh
Sounds
God.
like some Kinsey therapy right
Right.
there. So, yeah, he puts her to sleep. It says she crosses her arms on her breast like a little child about to say her prayers. So, this is also an esoteric thelemic
Mm,
sign of a
yeah,
virus, right?
yeah. I just realized also that Wendy is Mary, right? She's Wendy Moira what's her name? Wendy Moira.
Wendy Moyer, Angela Darling.
Right. Moira's a Irish form of Mary.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And yeah, because when we talk about Peter Pan and Wendy, the 2023 one, this was all about
Yes.
her, really. This is all about her coming of age,
Yeah.
her awakening. And that's really when Pan goes for you, is when you blossom into a woman.
Yeah, I got a lot of things to say about that one. So
Okay.
we'll get to that
there.
one.
So they do this procedure on poor Mary, the servant girl, the little gutter snipe that he rescued from Victorian England. And
I'm here to rescue you.
yeah,
It's gonna be great. I'm gonna give you a good life. You lie on this stone slab.
just let me scramble your brains for a second.
Oh my God.
So it works. And when they come back to see her, it says she's lying wide awake, rolling her head from side to side, grinning vacantly, and looking like just a terror. I mean, that gave me a chill, actually. Yeah. It was, the old stuff is a lot scarier sometimes than the new stuff.
It is. Yes. Yeah. Because again, there's no extraneous. It's all about the imagery, like the simple imagery and the psychology. Well, not in terms of psychological terms, but in terms of like what your brain is seeing as you're engulfed into the narrative. Because again, one of the things about this is that even though it's a kind of a disparate narrative, like there are various voices and we're finding things, the reader is brought along into finding these like various artifacts as if we're the detective, so that when you come across them, you're led into this place where you want to see what's around the corner. And then when you see it, you're, oh my God. It's worse than I
thought.
Right? Yes, it is. It's worse.
Yeah. So it worked, and it said, it is a great pity she is a hopeless idiot. However, it could not be helped, and after all, she has seen the great god Pan.
Right.
So poor Mary, that was her fate. Turning into a grinning, crazy. Do you remember that movie, The People Under the Stairs?
Mm-hmm.
And the lady they had to take care of.
It reminded me of. There's a lot of the Ripper in this. There's a lot of Jack the Ripper in this, because he mentions 1888, and there's Whitechapel. He mentions that I think it's 3 different references in this book to Ripper. But I remember at the end of From Hell, midway through when Ian Holm is doing the lobotomy on the girl, and she's the girl that has seen who the Ripper really. So she's, in a sense, she's seen the same thing. She has seen this hellish version. That's what he wants to enact, is this Masonic, ritual where she's like meeting her fate, and he is the agent of fate here, right? Yeah, and then he lobotomizes her, so she's stuck there forever, and she's like this whimpering idiot left in the hay bale. And all the scientists are like, "Oh, very good. Yeah.
You've done it, old chap."
Like, yes, you've done it. We're going to knight you.
Yeah. Yes. Oh man. Okay, so chapter 2 is all about Mr. Clark and his past. So he had a vision of Pan in his childhood. Now he's obsessed with stories about the devil. And he tries to stop himself, but he just cannot keep himself from collecting all of these accounts of people seeing the devil or Pan. And one of the stories that he has in his collection is about a girl named Helen V. So Helen V was, it just jumps into like another story, and you have no idea how this connects to what just happened with the Mary and the lobotomy, right?
Right.
But so now you're reading the story about Helen V, who showed up in a village under peculiar circumstances and was given to some adoptive parents to raise when she became of age, because they wanted to socialize her, right?
Right.
So they gave her to some foster parents, and weird things start happening in this village. One was a little boy sees Helen V in the woods with a man, and what he saw caused him to have a nervous breakdown. Right? The little boy.
Yeah. Yeah. He was horrified at hearing the most dreadful screams, evidently the result of a great terror. The little boy who was running headlong was evidently terribly frightened, and on questioning him, the man elicited that after picking a posy of flowers, he felt tired and lay down on the grass and fell asleep. And Helen V was playing on the grass with a strange naked man.
Uh-huh.
He said he felt dreadfully frightened and ran away crying for his father. Joseph Dubbs proceeded in the direction indicated by his son and found Helen V sitting on the grass in the middle of a glade or open space left by charcoal burners. And then it was a strange man. And then the bottom of that paragraph, he became nervous and strange in his manner, refusing to leave the cottage by himself and constantly alarming the household by waking in the night with cries of "the man in the wood, father, father." Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So this is kind of like the Village era,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
That M. Night Shyamalan.
Yes.
And what Helen B does is goes out all day long and stays in the woods and comes back, at dark, and that's all she does. And
Mm-hmm.
the person who gave her to the foster parents said, just let her do whatever she wants, and I'll pay you handsomely to just, house her.
Yeah, this is like it's like the Village. It's like the the Crucible at the beginning of the Crucible, because the whole story starts because the town Puritan preacher is walking along he's looking for his girl that he took in, who is his niece,
Mhm.
that he like there's a lot of innuendo in it, and he is watching her from the bushes, and she's with a group of women, and then they see him with Tituba from Barbados, and she's cutting the chicken and rubbing blood all over themselves, and then they're
Oh
dancing
yeah.
over a magic circle and then over the fire, and then when he catches her, then she goes catatonic. So it's
Uh-huh.
sort of the impetus for that. It's also the same, by the way. I just rewatched The Witch, and
Mm.
which has a Pan Black Phillip goat figure in it who turns
Yeah.
into Lucifer,
Yeah.
and there's a scene in that where the father says, "We got to get well, what's the girl's name in it? We have to get her." He says, "We have to get her out of here. We have to get her. We have to hire her out to one of the other families in town. They'll take care of her." So it's like, again, you're going to have this girl who's like they're going to sort of orphan her and then sell her to another group, um, because of the horror that she's witnessing, which is after the baby gets taken in
Mm.
The Witch. So it's sort of the same. It's the same thing. You go out in the woods, you see the Pan Satan figure in the woods playing around with the witches and taking people. You get horrified, and then you sell the kids off, I
Mhm.
suppose.
What I like those movies, because part of the horror is just how they had to survive back then.
Right.
Just how like bare bones you had to chop down the trees to make your house, and just
Yeah.
in the cold winter, and it just adds a whole layer of horror and uncomfortability to it.
It does, and also because, especially the Puritan ones, it's like the beginning of the movie of The Witch. He's too Puritan for the Puritan government group in
Right.
the town. He's
Yeah.
like, "No, you're not doing it right. We've come across the ocean and we didn't like how you did it, so we're going to go out on our own, right?" But the woods is where the devil lives for
Yeah.
them, and so they're already oppressed by the fact that like they're it's like they're a mini cult within themselves.
Right. Yeah. You're
Um,
a cult within a cult. And
right.
this is how Aleister Crowley's dad was, because he was a Plymouth Brethren.
That's right. Yeah.
So weird culty pilgrim people.
Yeah.
Nothing is ever pure enough for them.
Yeah, they needed to just come down here to Virginia. All right, it would have been a lot. It would have been a lot different. Down here in Virginia, in Jamestown, right? It was all about they were making money, right? They're working for the Virginia Company,
Uh-huh.
and then they all started cannibalizing each other because they were like, what are we gonna do? These Indians, and then John Smith got here and said, "Look, you people are pervert. Like this is freaky. All right, look, here's how it's gonna be. If you don't work, then you don't eat." And
Uh-huh.
everything else, we're just going to survive and make our stuff. We're not going to be culty out here.
Hmm.
Right. There's not going to be any like going out into the woods and you're more hardcore than the rest of us. You're going to stay within the limits of the town, and we're
Yeah.
going to.
But what's interesting too about this book is like it's on the cusp of like the scientific revolutions and going away from spiritualism to materialism, and just stark like what you can see is matter and that's it.
Yeah.
But already we're marrying technology to black magic and
Mm-hmm.
devil, and also like nature worship,
Right.
right?
I guess and Helen, she's called Helen, I guess.
Yeah,
She's
Helen
supposed to be
V.
like I suppose she's like Helen of Troy. So Helen is taken from Agamemnon and taken to Troy,
Hmm.
right, where she's sort of worshipped like a goddess, and is the cause of war. So that gets transposed into into war in themselves, I suppose. But Helen is an object of beauty, in other words.
Well, speaking of that, they are linking a lot of these things to the Roman times because the village was by a old Roman wall or
Yeah.
boundary. And then when the little boy who saw her with Pan, he's having these nervous breakdowns and they take him to the doctor's house and he sees a statue of Pan and like loses it.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Oh, we just excavated this like from an old
Oh
Roman site
no.
like not too long ago." And so it's almost like Pazuzu powers. Remember
Yes.
that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're excavating and you find a statue of this devil man, and
Just put it back. No,
just
just smash it.
just smash the damn thing,
Yeah.
right?
um so there's that story, and then so Clark is going through all of these papers of like the X-Files, right?
uh,
He's got a bureau of X-Files that he's going through. So now we're reading these X-Files. Another file was about
yeah.
a girl in the
So you're saying Bat Boy is real?
yeah. That boy almost killed Scully.
Yeah.
Remember?
I tweeted at him when I started Twitter. I tweeted at him afterwards. That episode was on television. I tweeted him, "You saying Bat Boy is real?" He loved it.
Goat boy is real.
Yeah, yeah.
So Helen V grows up a little bit. She gets a friend who's about her age. They're saying they're about what, like 15, 16-ish,
Hmm.
maiden age. And Helen V takes her friend into the forest and to get Molested
Mm,
by Pan,
yeah.
right? And
This is Pan's Labyrinth, by the way. I mean, that's the Roman, because in Pan's Labyrinth they're the Roman ruins.
yeah.
And she immediately, when they get to the place where they are for the fascists go up and they're whatever, they have their little place, the phalangists, and then she immediately sees the Roman ruins and walks into the labyrinth. And then it's almost like he is walking through a labyrinth. The man in the wood, grotesque appearance, the owner of the house. Well, that's what you just read here. Yeah. But my note was at the top of the page was SRA Monarch Kathy O'Brien.
Mm. Mhm.
Yeah. Helen was known in the village for excessive liberality, and the impression was general that she would one day inherit a large sum of money from the relative and then takes her into the woods.
Yeah. So at this point, the reader does not know what Helen has to do with Mary, right? And then at the end of this chapter, the Helen's friend disappears, or her mom finds her in the bed with her skirt up that she has been taken advantage of by Pan, and then she disappears. And then at the end is this Latin,
Yeah.
"Et diabolus incarnate est et homo factus est," which is, and a devil was made incarnate and a human being was produced. So this is very Rosemary's Baby.
It is. And that's also the Elizabeth Barrett Browning poem, The Great God Pan is Dead. And I wrote atavistic reversion to ancestral, antique, and primordial. Also on that facing page on page 20, it's just interesting to look at the language because it is like you're reading Twilight language, because we're talking about a book where we're talking about two different worlds, a literal and a figurative, a here and now and a spiritual world that's beyond the veil. It's interesting to look at some of the language and how it adds up. Like when you just look at, you can't really see that. When you look at the page, just the verbs in that one paragraph: live, die, struggle, conquer, fail, fall, grieve, suffer.
Nightmare.
Yeah. Unspeakable elements enthroned, as it were, and triumphant in human flesh.
Oh.
And this is foreshadowing. It's foreshadowing that Pan has. What did I write? Oh, that he has. Well, I don't want to give away what happens in the book, but it's foreshadowing something that happens that Pan has done in this sex magic ritual.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So now we're getting to chapter 3, where some more characters are introduced. Villiers.
So many characters. God.
I know. Villiers and Wadham and Charles Herbert. So these are two dandies. Well, one, Villiers, he's just like a man about town, right? He's like your Dorian Gray, or
I'm a Jack the Lad.
Yeah.
Right.
And
notice at the bottom of that page, I couldn't help but think that of the part with Hannibal Lecter, because it talks about Villiers had emerged from his restaurant, and after an excellent dinner of many courses, assisted by his ingratiating little flask of Chianti.
Yeah, he did. Chianti. Right. What did you call it? Yeah. Oh, foppish. Yes, he's like a foppish dandy man.
Foppish dandies.
And he is just finishing his fine meal, and he comes out and he runs into like a homeless beggar, and he recognizes him as somebody who he graduated with not too long ago from university. So he's like, how did I end up here and you ended up there, right?
Well, the world needs ditch diggers too, I suppose.
Come to find out, he was red-pilled when he met Helen V, and Helen V corrupted his soul. Right, so the homeless beggar man married this Helen lady,
right,
and he said, she spoke of things which even now I would not dare whisper in the blackest night. Not in your most fantastic hideous dreams can you have imagined forth the faintest shadow of what I've heard and seen. So he's seen some shit.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. I've seen some stuff, man, and heard some shit. Yeah.
He's got that 1,000-yard stare of, post-traumatic stress disorder just from being married to this Helen. And she was a ruined man. I mean, he was a ruined man in a year, because she took it all from him and left him haunted. And he does not even think of her as human.
I was a foppish dandy of the nth degree until I met this skeezer. Yes. He said things. He doesn't ever blink again. Page 23 also talks about London has been called the city of encounters. It's more than that. It's the city of resurrection. And then on page 56, later on, jumping on, they'll call London the city of nightmares.
Yeah. Because he's a haunted man who has seen hell. So then they're talking again about the bad odor that came from their house, from the homeless man and Helen V's house. They like to use the word queer a lot in this book, in the weird way, in the way that it means something weird.
And he was a queer fellow. He had an odor like Henry Lee Lucas. It was unmistakable.
So him and Helen move into this house, and then there's like dead bodies happening around the house. There's all this bad smells. People don't want to be friends with them. Everyone who saw her said she was at once the most beautiful woman and the most repulsive they had ever set eyes on. So there's another alchemical like duality.
Yeah, it sounds like Crowley's Lola Zaza or whatever. It sounds like the Scarlet Women that he wanted,
Yeah,
beautiful women that he then degrades into beasts.
Well, not only that, this book that I haven't done the Robin show yet because I was not feeling good this week, but they talk about the law of reversion. And an ad that he put out for Scarlet Women, calling for ugly women, fat women, women with scars, tattoos, colored women. Not that that's ugly, but he in the time he was trying to think of anything that he was repulsed by, and he wanted to use that in his ritual. Imagine
answering the ad.
Right?
Oh, God.
Like, what? That's me. I'm ugly. Finally. So Helen is bad news. She stinks. She's beautiful and ugly at the same time. And so now Villiers and Clark, Villiers, not Villers, and Clark are friends somehow. So they're trying to figure out who is this Helen lady who was the downfall of his college friend, right?
Is he Clark because it's like, I know this is English, but we said he was a pioneer. The other guy thought of himself as a pioneer. So it's kind of like this duo figure. So it's kind of a Lewis and Clark,
Oh, yeah.
duo here. And then we have Villiers, the villain. He's not the villain, but
let's see.
There's definitely a part on page 30. This is the beginning of the Ripper connections that I saw in the book. Because at the top of page 30, it says, but some very odd things came out about them, though it was between 5 and 6 in the morning. The dead man was removed and a large crowd had collected, and several of his neighbors ran to see what was going on. So he was removed. And then pardon me, at the bottom of the page, I know perfectly well what caused death. Blank died of fright, of sheer awful terror. I never saw features so hideously contorted in the entire course of my practice, and I've seen the faces of a whole host of dead. The doctor was usually a cool customer enough, and certain vehemence in his manner struck me, but I couldn't get anything more out of him. That's the same thing that happens. I did an analysis of Jack the Ripper about a year ago, and that's the same sort of things that the investigators are saying when they come upon the bodies. And then there are more references later on in the book, which we'll get to.
What year was Jack the Ripper's 1890?
It's 1888.
88?
Yeah.
Okay. And this was 1890. So
it was well known.
Yeah, it's not fresh on everybody's mind. So then they introduce a couple more like characters. Austin, a guy named Austin and Billy are friends, and they are kind of on the trail of like Helen V. And then this other lady, Mrs. Beaumont. So Mrs. Beaumont is known for like hosting weird dinner parties that everybody loves. All of the gentry of London like to go to her weird dinner parties.
Yes, come to my salon. Oh, the fops will be there. It's like, I guess at the end of the Victorian era, every sort of passion was satiated, right? So then they started to get into the occult.
Yeah.
And into, mixing electrical energy and the occult in these seances and looking for something else to satisfy them, because they had opium, right? Remember they invented morphine as a cure for cocaine, or was it vice versa? One was invented as a cure for the other.
Right.
Oh, your child is on morphine. Well, take some cocaine. Right. And they can do anything they want, and they have all this money and this power, and they own, a quarter of the globe. So at that point, I guess they start getting into the occult.
Right. Because they're just pushing boundaries of science and exploration and discovery. And so what next is the spirit world. Because they've conquered, pretty much under that regime, Pax Britannica at that time. There was nowhere else to go. So one scene in this book, they are looking at some artwork of somebody who has had a run-in with this lady. And it says, in the frightful Walpurgis night of evil, strange monstrous evil that the dead artist had set forth in hard black and white, the figures of fauns and satyrs and agipans danced before his eyes. So I had to look up what an agipan was, and that is the Capricorn.
Yeah. That's the goatfish.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Danced before his eyes, the darkness of the thicket, the dance on the mountaintop, the scenes by the lonely shores and green vineyards, by rocks and desert places, a world before which the human soul seemed to shrink back and shudder. So coming into contact with this person has caused artists to go mad, little children to go mad, maidens to lose their virtue and disappear and die.
Right.
So everybody who comes into contact with this person who has a terrible fate. Yeah.
Yeah, you would pass the rest of your life as I pass mine, a haunted man, a man who has seen hell.
Yeah. So this poor guy, he is black pill. And then there's some more Latin in this chapter on page 46.
Okay.
Talking about the universe is silent throughout the day, and just basically like Pan with the fishtails playing reed pipes.
Mm.
Right.
Oh yeah. Okay. Oh yeah. My note says the AG Panem, Zodiac Capricorn, Goatfish, CF Jamie reference. I wrote. I wrote. Let's see. The universe is lifeless at day, but the secret is not without horrors. At night, fires shine. Yeah, this is from this paragraph. The Aegipanus. Oh, this is the Latin inscription. Oh yeah, I'm just translating it now. Yeah. Sile per diem universus. Yeah. So I don't know what your translation was. The universe is lifeless at day, but the universe is not without horrors. At night, fires shine. The Aegipanus. I couldn't read my writing here. Resounds everywhere. The melody of the flutes and the tinkling of the cymbals are heard on the seacoast. Which sounds like almost like a stage in a ritual initiation.
Well, speaking of that, the chapter 6 talks about, so we've got this lady, Mrs. Beaumont, that got our eye on now. We've got Helen V. We've got Mary, the lobotomized girl.
Clark, Villiers, and now we get Lord Argentine.
Lord Argentine.
Yeah,
he's a favorite in London.
Yes, he's Byronic.
Yeah, he was the foppiest of fops.
Right.
But basically what they're saying is like anybody that goes to dinner at Mrs. Beaumont's, like all of these people who wouldn't be committing unaliving on themselves are doing this for no reason, and it's like a rash of these in London. And every time
I was going to say it's also we get this variety of characters who represent the various levels of high society mixed in with this, and sometimes they are, I mean, this is Byronic. He says Lord Argentine was a great favorite in London society. At 20 he had been a poor man decked with the surname of an illustrious family, but forced to earn a livelihood as best he could, and the most speculative of moneylenders would not have entrusted him with 50 pounds on the chance of ever changing his name for a title and his poverty for a great fortune. That's Byron. That's Byron to a T. Byron is the richest poor man, right? He's got a name and a title, but he has no money, and he's subject to moneylenders, and he ends up being financed by this weird, in his real life. There's a biography of Byron. He was financed by this weird society woman who hosted these salons, and she was involved in Eyes Wide Shut activities, and he writes.
That's her.
Yeah, that's her. Yeah, and he writes letters to her saying, like, please, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do this anymore. He doesn't say what this is.
Yeah.
But she's like, you must go. You must do the thing. Ooh. Yeah. People can go back and watch that Byron stream. But that's Byron to a T, yeah.
Is that on your channel?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So the thing that I wrote about the Lord Argentine unaliving was that they found him, his body leaning forward at an angle from the bottom of the bed. He had choked himself in the way that, like, Robin Williams was found. And more people have been found like that, right? Yeah.
It's not in the way of the total pervert thing, right? The guy from Kill Bill was found, but it is.
Oh, yeah.
Which is the auto.
David Carradine.
Yeah, David Carradine.
Yeah.
Which again, I hate to bring Norm into this again, but Norm Macdonald says the worst part about that is the fact that you do that and then you are found. So someone has to find you like that.
Yeah. Right? And they had to piece together what happened. Like,
right. Oh boy. But he is, found strangled, I suppose. and there was coming up. There's another one. I don't think it was this one, but there's another one in here that was just like, I think it was Aldo Moro. Aldo Moro was the guy that was involved with P2 Lodge and the Vatican scandal. Was he the one that was found strangled in the Masonic ritual over the Thames?
I don't know.
I'm sure when this goes live, somebody will say who it was. But
what about Captain Morgan? Didn't he have a bad view like that for talking about masonry?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, you opened a new rabbit. I thought it was just that. No, I was gonna try to make some stupid joke about spicy rum.
No, I'm serious. Like
he was a foppish character, though. He was a very Captain Hook character.
Yeah, he did something they didn't like. I'll have to look that up again. So, but anyways, each of the people that did this had dined at her house the night before, and no reason whatsoever.
Right.
But this is the Mrs. Beaumont who has taken London by storm. She would be called very handsome, and yet there's something about her face which I didn't like. Well, spoilers ahead. Helen, the lady that ruined the college guy, Mrs. Beaumont, are all the same person.
Right.
And then you come to find out that this was actually the daughter of Mary who got the lobotomy and saw Pan.
So it's generational.
Yes. And
51, page 51 is a good description. It's talking about Lord Swanley. Was found one morning in his dressing room hanging from a peg affixed to the wall again. There was no explanation in either case, but a few bald facts: a living man in the evening and a body with a black swollen face in the morning. That alone yeah. The police have been forced to confess themselves powerless to arrest or to explain the sordid murders of Whitechapel. There's your Jack the Ripper reference. And Whitechapel is, for the folks at home, Whitechapel is a district in the East End of London where the Jack the Ripper murders took place. It's still there. Each of these men who had resolved to die a tortured, shameful death was a rich, prosperous, and to all appearances in love with the world, and not the acutest research should ferret out any shadow of a lurking motive in either case. And there's a victim of a fifth nameless tragedy, which ties in with Jack the Ripper again. It's like the points of the pentagram. And then again, we get a reiteration of this kind of phrase about discovering the dead body on the next page, 52 at the bottom. I never experienced such a feeling of horror as when I read the account of Argentine's death. I didn't understand at the time, and I don't now. And then there's the theory of acute suicidal mania. And then they say, as for the theory of mania, that is very well, page 53, that is very well, of course, for the coroner's journey, but everybody knows that it's all nonsense. Ascidal mania is not smallpox. And then it goes into the labyrinth. Austin tried to shake off the remembrance of tragedies as hopeless and perplexed as the labyrinth of Daedalus, and began to talk in different voice of the more pleasant incidents and adventures of the season. The labyrinth of Daedalus, of course, is in the myths, and is where Daedalus makes his way through the labyrinth and uses the string to track his way back. He creates the labyrinth, but at the inside the labyrinth is the Minotaur, and the Minotaur is a character as an archetype who sits in the abyss in judgment in Dante's Inferno. He's in one of the circles of hell. And so is Minos. Minos appears there as well. So in other words, you're making your way through the labyrinth, but also, and that is going to happen with Pan's Labyrinth, but is a way of talking about making your way through your psyche and through your, a spiritual journey through your psyche, finding, of course, the beast at the center of the thing.
Right. So the labyrinth is like, yeah, you just said your psyche, and it always has to do with girls coming of age. I mean, the movie Labyrinth with Connolly, classic, right?
Right. Or Jack Torrance chasing Danny through the labyrinth at the end of The Shining, right?
Yes.
Danny!
Wait, yeah.
Danny! He says, where he is the Minotaur in that.
So let's skip to page 65,
Okay.
where they're talking about Mrs. Beaumont's parties. And they're talking about an account of the entertainment Mrs. Beaumont provided for her choicer guests.
Oh, yeah.
He says, his eye caught by a word and phrase that followed it, and sick at heart with white lips and cold sweat pouring down like water from his temples, he flung the paper down. It doesn't really say what he read, but they said it is horrible enough. But after all, it is an old story, an old mystery played in our day and in dim London streets instead of amidst the vineyards and the olive gardens. So what do you make of that?
Well, I think that there's a continuous motif in this of people coming across artifacts, like we mentioned, and then living living or dead artifacts. Those are the terms mentioned in Donnie Darko that I just did, so I keep using artifact. But faces and pieces of paper that indicate absolute shock and horror at the thing that they're finding in the labyrinth. And again, this also occurs, just to jump back on page 58. Why? Because it made my blood run cold to see that man's face. I could never have supposed that such an infernal medley of passions could have glared out of any human eyes. I almost fainted as I looked. I knew I had looked into the eyes of a lost soul. That man no longer belonged to this world. It was the devil's face I looked upon.
Mm-hmm.
So I suppose the paper that they're finding at this point is what's on the paper? Is it part of the description of the ritual?
At that point, I think it was her a sketch of her face that they're like putting two and two together, like this person is also this person or whatever.
Right.
I wanted to ask you what the symbol was on page 65. So 65, 66, he says, we know what happened to those who chanced to meet the great god Pan, and those who are wise know that all symbols are symbols of something, not of nothing. It was indeed an exquisite symbol beneath which men long ago veiled their knowledge of the most awful, most secret forces which lie at the heart of all things. What do you think that symbol was? Because then they go on to talk about electric currents, and such forces cannot be named, cannot be spoken, cannot be imagined except under a veil and a symbol to the most of us appearing a quaint, poetic fancy, to some a foolish tale. What do you think that symbol is?
A terror that may dwell in the secret place of life. I think that, well, by alluding to a symbol and not naming the symbol, but then in the same paragraph talking about how symbols are symbols of something, not of nothing. It's interesting. There's a weird play being, there's something weird happening here in terms of the play on language and in terms of what we're supposed to imagine. So this is one example of, the book is great at showing us the thing, right? And they show us the horror, but they don't tell us in exposition what it is. A lot of the book is exposition, but in terms of the actual horrific things. But this part, it's like we get to a thing and they say that there's a symbol, it's a symbol of something, but then they don't show or name the symbol.
Exactly. So, they don't even describe what it's a circle with a pointy thing.
So it's supposed to be something that we can imagine, but we're left up to ultimate horror to be able to imagine what it is. It could be a number of things, but it's almost more horrific. What is it?
It's the Prince thinking symbol.
Is it? It's the Ankh?
No, it's Prince. Remember that symbol they used? Artists formerly known.
Yeah. Which was like an Ankh with a little wavy thing on it.
Well, it was like man and woman with a little swirly do.
See, I thought it was, to me, if I imagine something like this, something that's commonplace, but is supposed to be something that's even deeper, and I imagined the spiral. Okay. And because I think that's so ingrained. I think once you cross a certain, okay, so in terms of, if you are in this sort of circle of people who are, reading this sort of stuff and in the general, conspiracy world, and you're reading about those things, there's a point at which you can't return, right? And for me, that point is learning about the PG, the P gate stuff.
Yeah.
And the conspiracy of silence. I don't want to say, but people know what that is. But when I see that to me is a commonplace symbol, and it's about energy, right? It's like revolving hurricane,
Mhm.
the swirling of the psyche inside the brain,
Mhm.
the jumbling of the brain stew that the doctors are creating in these people, and also the circles of hell,
Right.
right, swirling downwards. And it's also
And
something that occurs in all. It occurs in Pan's Labyrinth. It occurs in Hook. I didn't see it in Peter Pan and Wendy, but it's something that it seems to be indicative of this sort of sex magic ritual tied in with a hellish vision.
yeah, what about that the black and white spiral that hypnotists use,
Mm,
right? It's kind of like that.
right. Going down deeper into yourself,
Yeah,
into the
deeper and
subconscious
deeper.
mind. Yeah. I mean, what's worse than that?
That is hell.
Right.
Yeah. Being trapped inside your own mind like that.
Yeah.
So here at the climax of the story, the guys who figure out that Mrs. Helen V, Mrs. Beaumont, all of these people are same. He says he's going to go to her house, and he says, I shall offer her a choice, alone with this cord in a locked room for 15 minutes. If we go in, it's not done. I shall call the nearest policeman. That is all.
Mm.
So there's really nothing in the storyline after that except for this papers by a doctor, the
Mm.
fragments
Yeah.
of the doctor who witnessed what happened when they
Right.
went to confront Mrs. Beaumont. And the doctor says, I was privileged or accursed to see that which was on the bed lying there black like ink,
Mm.
transformed before my eyes, the skin and the flesh and the muscles and the bones and the firm structure of the human body that I had thought to be unchangeable and permanent as adamant began to melt and dissolve. So this is what I was talking about in the beginning. The alchemical de-evolution
Uh-huh.
of Mrs. Beaumont back into goo,
Mm.
or the primordial ooze of panspermia,
Okay.
right? And he says, I saw the form waver from sex to sex, dividing itself from itself, and then again reunited. Then I saw the body descend to the beasts which it ascended, and that which was on the heights go down to the depths, even to the abyss of all being.
Yeah. So dissolving into the Stygian blackness
Yes.
of black luminous hell, um, surrounded by the beasts of pandemonium, right? All the
Yeah.
devils are there, Pan, and yeah, even to the abyss of all being. You said also, of course, 1888 is the manuscript on page page 70,
Mhm.
and one more thing, just in terms of the construction of the book, like when you look at the book, just when you look at the page, see how the difference between this page and this page right here. And
Mhm.
one of the differences is that one thing that's pretty clever about this is that oftentimes in literature, the great literature has this synthesis of form and content. Form plus content equals meaning. And it's almost more difficult to do in prose because in a poem, you have the immediate construction of the form on the page. So, like when you're looking at a sonnet, you have 14 lines and you see it right on the
Mhm.
page, or you have sestets, or, but in prose where everything is thrown onto a page, it's more difficult to do, and it has to the meaning relies more on the content. But here, what we see is that in throughout the book, when we know in a subtle way when we're being led towards something horrific, because the paragraphs will often get longer and unbroken,
Mhm.
and they'll either be short paragraphs with simple things, simple imagery, this simple horror of of that we can't even expect, or they'll be longer. Like I wrote, longer paragraphs is unbroken, um, the unbroken sharing of the thought of the awful shock of black deeds and symbols. And again, the wordplay, like in that paragraph, unknown goal, black, faded, grimed, black, dust, winter. I saw what was required. Dull street, quiet, no sunshine, no air. So in other words, the words almost pop out at you like a code, but it's carefully chosen. And even what you just read, you said the word adamant. The word, yeah, permanent as adamant. Well, adamant is related to like That's in Paradise Lost. Adamantine chains. So Satan is like held down at the shores of the lake of fire in adamantine chains. So
Mhm.
they're permanent. They're unbreakable. Relating to Adam. They're from the beginning of creation. So
Mhm.
they're unbreakable. That's where you get in the Marvel movies adamantium.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So, but I thought it was, this is a well done book. I know there's more. There's the fragments. And the hideous transformation on page 70 and 72. It's almost like he sees a Baphomet in the
Exactly.
in the abyss before death, which is the Pan. He sees the great god Pan, I suppose.
Hmm. Yeah. So what had happened was the guys went to confront Mrs. Beaumont. They convinced her to kill herself. And the interesting thing about this book is the main character, you never hear from her. You never hear her speak. You only see the wake of destruction that she has caused. So it's almost like just this force instead of an actual character.
So is she like an avatar for Pan himself?
Well,
Because we never see him.
yeah, she's Pan's daughter.
Right. Oh,
Or
yeah, of course. Yeah.
if you're reading it in a more materialistic way or like a rational way, you would read it as she's the daughter of the scientist who impregnated Mary before he gave her the lobotomy, because that would explain the tender kisses and stuff.
Look at his eyes. His eyes.
He has your hooves. Okay, so yeah, when the Mrs. Beaumont Pan's daughter, Helen V, kills herself, and the doctor had witnessed what happened when she was like morphing into the evolutionary goo. He says, I watched, and at last I saw but a substance as jelly. I saw a form shaped in dimness before me, which I will not farther describe, but the symbol of this form may be seen in ancient sculptures and in paintings which survive beneath the lava, too foul to be spoken of, as a horrible and unspeakable shape, neither man nor beast was changed into human form. There came finally death.
This is also like under the skin.
Yeah.
I mean, in that it's an alien ghoul demon, right?
Yeah.
But she meets the guy in the woods. There's a scene at the end where she meets the guy in the woods. They're in Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
She meets the guy in the woods, and then she seduces him. ScarJo gets naked, and then she takes off her human skin suit, and she's the black ghoul.
Yeah.
And then it goes into the blackness of. It's just like in Stranger Things with the upside down. There's the black pool, and then like consumes his body as a shell, and it just kind of floats like a ribbon.
Yeah.
So I suppose it's the same sort of.
I was going to say that about Neverland too, is like the upside down in Stranger Things.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We'll get to that in a second. Yeah. Okay. So, in kind of like the epilogue or whatever, they talk about one of these guys going back to the village where Helen V grew up by the Roman walls. And it says, I looked over the meadow where once had stood the older temple of the god of the deeps. It was the house where Helen lived. And they're talking about a museum in that town containing Roman remains, which have been found in the neighborhood, and a pillar with an inscription to the great god Nodens, the god of the great deep or abyss. Flavius Selinus has erected this pillar on account of the marriage which he saw beneath the shade. What do you make of that?
Well, the inscription reminds me of a cipher, and it's like a coded cipher, and it's a monolith. I mean, they find a monolith, right? And this is, you see the same thing walking into Pan's Labyrinth. You see this sort of monolith appearing in the entranceway into the labyrinth. And you see the same, oftentimes in like Nordic or even in I think it's in the Iliad. You see a monolith or like some sort of statue or something set up that's supposed to be in memoriam for somebody great, but in this it's the opposite. It's inverted world, right? And then we see I talked to you beyond the shadows and of the god Pan. You remember Mary? She was the mother of Helen Vaughn, who was born 9 months after that night. So we know that it's the child of the. What's the Christopher Lee movie? Is it Eye of the Devil? The one where he's doing the ritual?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Human flesh may become the veil of horror one dare not express. Helen Vaughn did well. This is page 77 in the middle. Helen Vaughn did well to bind the cord about her neck and die. Though the death was horrible, the blackened face, the hideous form of death, the strange horror that you witnessed surprises me but little. And now Helen is with her companions. ...
Yeah,
Oh
in
God.
hell.
Yeah, in hell.
The abyss. So
yeah, she's down there with Beelzebub, I suppose.
I wonder why it was so easy for them to get her to do that. They never really said. I guess maybe life was just a big. She was bored of it, or I don't know. Maybe she was tired of humans and wanted to go back to hell. I don't know.
Yeah, she wanted to pierce the veil back to her hell world and hang out with her ghouls and goblins.
Yeah. So the marriage which he saw beneath the shade, I don't know. Does that remind you of any mystery plays?
Well, I mean, isn't that well? The first thing I think of is the nymphs running wild in the shade in the Bacchanal, right?
Yeah.
So it's an ORGY, isn't it?
And of course, nymph is where we get the word nympho.
Yes.
Right.
Right. And like we said in Ovid, Ovid pursuing, the fauns and the satyrs that pursued this nymph. I guess in the shade of the shade of the Glady River, Maisie meandering through the woodland, and she transforms into a reed.
Yeah.
Can you imagine reading this in the late 1800s? You'd be like, oh, scandalous.
Yeah.
Sounds like last night at Mary Winston's salon. We did the same thing.
We just got back from Hellfire Club and
yeah, right. Yeah. Benjamin Franklin was there. He loved the story.
Yeah.
You hear that story about Ben Franklin having all those bodies buried in his house in London?
Yeah. No. Well, that was Great God Pan. Still some mysterious things in it. But I think we covered it pretty well. It was a really good horror novella.
Yes.
I could see why a lot of the horror writers look up to him. So let's continue down this labyrinth spiral and talk about Pan's Labyrinth, 2000 movie.
Well, there's two things I was gonna just mention in terms of literary references before we get to those, because I think they're relevant. And one is, I'll get to this one second because it's the Queen Mab speech from Romeo and Juliet. But the one that I really wanted to mention to bring into this, which might be too esoteric for people, I don't know, but is I'll just summarize the whole thing because it's in Ted Hughes. It's in Ted Hughes's collected poems. He has a poem called Pan, and then another one called Ouija. And I originally found this in the journals of Sylvia Plath. And then there's a book called Winter Pollen, which is by Ted Hughes. And this is all of his. Ted Hughes was the poet laureate. He wrote the poem Rain Charm for the Duchy, which was written for the newly born Prince Harry in 1984. And he was the poet laureate until 1998 when he died. But he wrote a book called Birthday Letters, which was a kind of a revision of his life with Sylvia Plath. Sylvia Plath is a famous American poet who died at age 32 in 1963, I think. But so here's what happened. So people probably know about Sylvia Plath and how she, committed S-side and in London. But there's a story that I read in her account in her journals about how Ted Hughes and Sylvia Plath were interested in esoterica and the occult, especially Ted Hughes. And they started playing around with a Ouija board, and eventually they realized they were talking to a being. They weren't just talking to nothingness. They were talking to something with a voice. And of course, in true esoteric fashion, they reached out to ask the name of this being, and the being presented himself as Pan. His name was Pan, and Ted Hughes became obsessed with Pan. And this is like the start of Sylvia Plath's downward spiral into madness and mania. And she says that one day they were sitting like in a glade. I think it was in the Lake District. I think it was in Cumbria. But they were sitting there, you know, having a good time, having a picnic. And she turned, and you know, Ted Hughes turned to her. They were married, and you know, they were a loving couple, both successful. Well, he was a successful poet at the time, but then he turned, and then he turned back, and she said that his eyes were black. He had the black marble eyes of someone possessed, and that he grabbed her by the throat and he strangled her and pushed her down on the ground, and he was on top, and she thought she was going to die. And then at the moment of death, and she looked up and his eyes were black, and it wasn't, she said it wasn't him. And then right at the moment of death, he released, and then he sat back up, and then she sat back up and turned and looked at him and was like, what was that? And he turned and he said, oh, it's a lovely day we're having. And he was a totally different person.
Oh, weird.
And she said that this terrified her so much that she was sure that it was Pan that did this to her. And it makes sense in light of what we just read, especially in the arboreal setting. And she'd been obsessed with Pan. In fact, one of her most famous poems is Daddy, the poem Daddy. And she's talking about, I won't read the whole poem. And I can't even read it's a great poem in terms of the canon. And I can't even read it because of some of the terms in here. It's very, there's a lot of violence in the poem, so I can't really read it. But there is one part where she says, on page 58, she says of Ariel, which won the Pulitzer Prize in the poem Daddy, in the stanza, she says, you stand at the blackboard, Daddy, in the picture I have of you, a cleft in your chin instead of your foot, but no less a devil for that. No, not any less the black man who bit my pretty red heart in two. I was 10 when they buried you. Whoa. So which is a Pan image, right? A cleft foot. She calls him Panzerman. His name was Otto Plath, and he was Austrian. And she sees various, you know, allusions to other historical events that I can't name, but she sees the cleft foot, and she later goes on at the end of the poem. The poem ends with, she says, if I've killed one man, I've killed two. The vampire who said he was you and drank my blood for a year, 7 years, if you want to know. Daddy, you can lie back down now. There's a stake in your fat black heart, and the villagers never liked you. They are dancing and stamping on you. They always knew it was you. Daddy, Daddy, you bastard, I'm through, she says.
Ooh.
So
seems
to be a poem of
some bad stuff happening to her.
Yes, some bad stuff happening, which is not just, I'm not just saying all this randomly. Obviously, that's tied in with the Pan imagery that we've just been reading.
Yeah.
So, and the other, I won't read this whole soliloquy, but there's a lot in terms of what we're going to talk about, the movies. And I see Tinkerbell, and we didn't really talk about Tinkerbell that much, or Tiger Lily, because there's so much in the Peter Pan book. But Tinkerbell is obviously taken from Queen Mab, which is in Romeo and Juliet, Act 1, Scene 4, when Mercutio gives his soliloquy. I mentioned this last week, but he says, then I see Queen Mab hath been with you. She is the fairy's midwife, and she comes in shape no bigger than an agate stone on the forefinger of an alderman, drawn with a team of little atomi over men's noses as they lie asleep. And he talks about her wagon spokes made of long spinner's legs, the cover of the wings of grasshopper, her traces of the smallest spider web, her collars of the moonstone's watery beams, her whip of cricket's bone, the lash of film, her wagoner, a small gray-coated gnat. So it's an esoteric, soliloquy where he's talking about how, in the context, he's talking about how Romeo has been asleep and he's been seduced by his new love for Juliet after Rosaline. But in terms of like the imagery of being asleep and overtaken by fairies going to another world, and it's a tiny little fairy who has all these there's a lot of natural imagery, right, with the moonstones and the crickets and we see that in Pan's Labyrinth, right, where she says, oh, it's a fairy, but it's like a little like cricket grasshopper thing, right?
Is that the one where she rides in an acorn?
Mm-hmm.
I always remembered that. I don't know why.
So there's a lot more. I mean, I found the Keats poem to Pan. There's the Shelley poem to Pan. There's Swinburne. There's Elizabeth Barrett Browning, which talks about Pan and Syrinx. And then my favorite, which if we have time, I'll get to it. But my favorite is my favorite poet, Arthur Rimbaud. French poet, 1854 to 1891, and he has multiple poems in his book, Illuminations. He wrote Illuminations and A Season in Hell, which is a kind of a Gnostic gospel as prose poem. And in his collected poems, he talks about the fawns. He often makes reference to the fawns in nature. So that's going to tie in with what we're about to talk about, I think.
So that's so crazy that they were doing Ouija board, talking to Pan.
Yeah.
Because have you ever heard of a lady named Tracy Twyman?
No.
Okay, so she was kind of like a esoteric researcher in maybe like 2012-ish. And she was doing this whole series about her and the Ouija board talking to Baphomet. Right? And we met her at conferences. We did shows and stuff. So she was an acquaintance who knew a lot about esoteric things. And as soon as she started doing these channelings of Baphomet, she called it, things started to go downhill. And then she died mysteriously. And some people don't know if it was by her own hand or what was the story there, because it was just so weird, but it had something to do with talking to Baphomet on the Ouija board.
Bad news, folks.
Yeah, please do not try to contact Spirit World with the Ouija board.
This is bad news, folks. This is not a good first date idea.
No.
To contact the Ouija board.
We just watched this horrible movie last night about like this hand that if you shake it, then you become possessed. And it's like people voluntarily submit themselves to these ghoulies. Right?
Yeah, yes. Well, I guess that's the point, right? They're voluntarily walking into it and asking questions. And
you have to say, I let you in. And you
right. Yeah. And I suppose a lot of it is determined by your belief system and your, what do they call it? Intentionality. Is that a word? But the poem here, I've got the beginning of the poem Ouija from Ted Hughes. And it's a long poem, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. But he says, Ouija, always bad news from the Ouija board. We spelt out the alphabet, fringed the arena of your coffee table with the letters, 2 goals, yes at one end, no at the other, then leaned, our middle fingers lolling on the bottom of the upturned glass, frivolity darkening to solemn apprehension. Respectfully, we summoned a spirit. It was easy as fishing for eels in the warm summer darkness, and hardly a minute before the glass began to nose at the letters, then to circle thoughtfully. And some occult pickpocket had slit the soul's silk and fingered us, but we explained it easily. Yeah, and then the poem Pan, which is short, Ted Hughes, and this is out of his book, I forget which book this is out of, but Pan, he writes, flowers, open pits of allure. The beast's glance makes the ghost faint. Invitation in the bird's throat, a goblet full, wet mouth and hot under softness, where the heart struggles at the surface, abandonment of water, long openings, disheveled silks, and nakedness of what resists nothing. The painful stiff grace of insects making the stones ache. So early earth in stifled convulsion with bellowings, with gas, roots torn up, with life gushing from the body in relief, as eye widens against eye, with death and hot bracket and birth under catskins, yields her daughters. Now, he's actually talking about panning, like panning for gold, because it's yielding up your the gold daughters of the earth, right? But it's clearly the figurative is clearly talking about Pan in terms of his demon god here. And Ted Hughes is an interesting poet because, I know I'm talking pretty far into talking about poetry here, which most people probably go, oh, but if there's somebody if anybody out there wanted to understand anything about modern poetry, I would say that Ted Hughes is the place to start. I mean, if you can read The Hawk in the Rain or Crow or Lupercal or Wolf Watching, and they read so easily because the language is so strong and visceral, and you know exactly what he's talking about right away, even though the deeper side of it and the subtext is something so dark and has this dark spiritual nature to it. But it's important, I think, to understand and to read works like that because it sets the tone for modern literature, which mirrors and sort of leads the way for the way that we think in the wider culture.
Well, and also you just made me think that it's the same spirits that are inspiring people throughout the ages too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So
what should we talk about now? Hook?
let's go to Spain.
Okay. All right.
In 1944, because this is the same year as the Peter Pan movie that we talked about last time, Pan, which is the name for their hero and not actually, it's a title, right? Like Lord or something like that. So Spain, 1944, fascist stepdad. And then, this, I found out the faun in Pan's Labyrinth was inspired by Guillermo del Toro's lucid dreams he would have about it as a child. He said at midnight, he would wake up and find a faun coming out from behind a grandfather clock. So this thing has been following Guillermo del Toro since he was a child.
El Labyrinto del Faunos.
Yes. Were you able to find one with English subtitles? That was really hard for me. Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, I just watch it in the regular Spanish, right?
Oh,
I don't. No. Verde, que te quiero verde. Verde, viento, verdes ramas. El barco sobre la mar y el caballo en las montañas. I didn't memorize that. It's a Garcia Lorca. Have you been to Spain?
Yeah.
You have?
Yeah.
Okay. Have you been to Pan's Labyrinth? No.
No, I did the Camino de Santiago.
Okay. Well, I spent 3 wild weeks in Spain. 2004, my last year at drama school. I flew to Spain for 3 weeks, and it was, God, what an awesome country. It was amazing.
Yeah, it's really cool. Yes. So, in the opening sequence of this movie, they're talking about an underground realm where there's no lies, no pain, and there's a princess who dreamt of the human world. She escaped and forgot where she came from. So right off the bat, there's like Persephone imagery coming out. There's the whole weird GROOMING aspect of telling kids like, oh, those aren't your parents. Your real parents are a king and queen. I'll take you to meet them. That is like in a lot of kids movies, right?
Yes.
So this little girl, they're driving to meet her stepfather, who is some kind of like fascist colonel or whatever, general. I don't know. What was he?
Yeah, he's the Capitan.
Yeah, Capitan.
Yeah, there is no one above the Capitan. Right.
And on their way there, she discovers this mysterious monument in the forest of a faun with a missing eye. So she puts the eye back in the socket and this like fairy bug appears, right? Yeah. And it was almost like the things that led up to her finding this were like set up. You know, the bug leads her to the pillar. And this is just like the monument to Nodens that we were reading about in Great God Pan book.
Yeah, it's interesting also that you brought up that it's always a world where they say there's no pain, right? Which is, but because it's the inverted world, they have to sacrifice, make blood sacrifices and all this stuff, and go follow a series of rituals and go through the sequence in order to get there. Instead of in a Christian, in Christianity, which is in Revelation, God will wipe away every tear from your eyes, right? You find yourself in heaven, and there's no more pain, there's no more sorrow, and there's really no pain, right? Because you're with God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, instead of making your way through this through this terrible series of rituals where
The
you get to this
underworld.
place, into the underworld, right? Where, oh, they're a king and queen and you're a princess. We told you that, even though you're surrounded in darkness, and there's a weird fawn demon that's leading
Yeah,
you.
right. And
Yeah.
um and we'll get to that in a second. Like, she goes down to meet the fawn, and on the rock is like the fawn and her and a baby.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like a weird trinity going on.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get to that in a second. So she discovers this, and she puts the eye in, and her initiation can begin. Right.
Yeah.
And this is like kind of saying now she's going to have the vision to see the spirit world.
Yeah, they're also in the car right before that. They're in the car going through the woods in a caravan, right? And and her mother tells her, when you meet the captain, I'll refer to him as father. So she has a lost father. She doesn't know where her father is, but this guy's going to be your new father, which is interesting.
He died, right? So that's where her father is in the underworld now.
Right. And for the folks at home, of course, the movie takes, like we were just saying, takes place, it's the Spanish Civil War, 1936 to 1945. It's like 1944, I think is what you said. And they're in the mountains, fighting the rebels. And it's funny how the phalangists are fighting in pristine uniforms.
Oh yeah.
Right. Even though they're in the woods.
Where did you get that?
Right.
And weren't they also fighting in World War II, or were they just doing their own thing?
Well, it was parallel with World War II, and of course, there's I saw Picasso's Guernica, which is everybody's seen the Cubist painting of when Hitler sent the Condor Legion over as a test run to bomb the city of Guernica, right, in Spain. But that was like the extent of their that was the extent of their overt involvement in World War II. So it was parallel, but they weren't involved with the greater war on the continent.
Oh, okay.
Even though it mimics that, it mirrors that in a number of ways, because you have fascists versus communists and so forth.
Right. So the Captain Vidal, he is the archetype of Saturn and time, because he's always carrying around that watch. Remember?
Right.
So we're tying this back into Capricorn again. Okay. With the timepieces, and he was like obsessed with the time of his father's death, so that's Saturn again. And the little girl, when she gets to the property where she's supposed to be staying, she follows the fairy under the Arch of Pan down the spiral staircase. So here's the spirals again, and we all know about the FBI
the finders
memo that they put out, right?
Yeah.
That identifies child predators. And the biggest one is a spiral, and then you've got a spiral triangle, and you've got a butterflies on there, I believe, and like some kind of spiral heart, or like a heart within a heart.
Yeah.
So these are the identifying symbols that they use to know each other in the wild. All of these child predators, right? Yeah,
glyphs and sigils of the creeperiest, evil, most ghoulish people.
Yeah. So you're going to see spirals all over this movie. And of course, the fawn tells her she's a princess and her real father has opened portals all over the world so she could return.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that. Because I thought of Donnie Darko. Have you ever seen a portal?
Yeah.
So, yeah, opening portals all over the world.
And don't you think that freaking fawn was like the creepiest thing? And she's not even phased at all.
Right. Which says something to me about Guillermo del Toro's like artistic vision, right? Is that the things that I think probably normal people find repugnant and disconcerting and gross, you would automatically, if you see that, or even if you see it in any other work, you run away, or this is not good. Just the physiognomy of this fawn, because it's not a fawn like in mythology, even, where it's like, oh, they're pleasant creatures playing around in the glade.
He's not even halfway cute like Mr. Tumnus.
Right.
He's like totally demonic looking.
Yeah. And his ears, hello,
Yeah.
and hola. Right?
And doesn't he have spirals on his head? Right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes, he did. Yeah.
Okay.
Ugh.
So creepy Spawn Man. Oh, it says that she is born of the moon and the king of the underworld.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And moon is, if we're following Selima and OTO and those kind of symbols, moon is Babylon, right? The counterpart to Horus.
Mm-hmm.
This book talks all about lunar symbolism.
That Aleister Crowley book talked about the rites of Luna, and then of course Ovid's Metamorphosis talks about the passage right before that is talking about Diana.
Mm-hmm.
So Diana Artemis,
Mm-hmm.
in the woods. So Syrinx is compared to Diana the way she holds up her dress when she's hunting.
Uh-huh.
So is she a moon child?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, she just said child of the moon, born of the
Mm-hmm.
moon and the king of the underworld. And then he goes on to give her the Book of the Crossroads.
Mm.
Surprise, surprise. How many times?
And Bone Thugs and Harmony started playing. See you at the crossroads.
Bom, 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 bom,
And it's a
bom,
blank
bom.
book. It's a
Yeah.
blank book with blank pages that her psyche writes in ink on the page to determine the three stages of the process. Does she have to go through just the 3 stages?
Uh-huh.
Are you trying to sing Bone
We have to
Thugs?
do 3 quests before the moon is full.
You were trying to remember the words to the Bone Thugs song.
You can't remember the words, can't you?
Hold on.
I'm gonna miss everybody. I'm gonna miss everybody.
And I'm gonna miss everybody. And I'm gonna miss everybody.
Yeah. Living in a hateful world, sending me straight to heaven.
Hey, I'm having a wonderful day. I'm gonna fuck with my wife. The first of the bar, smoking, joking, rolling blunts, and sipping on 40 ounces again. Gone. We got the busting. Well, all nights we high. We got the busting. Where's 99? I get some play, yo. What you need? We got weed. Yeah.
And we pray and we pray and we pray.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So we talk about the crossroads all the time. This is a super ancient thing going back way back to the first cities, Mesopotamia, where they would meet with the gods in the ziggurat that is known as the meeting point or the crossroads, and then go all the way to Robert Johnson and the beginning of rock and roll, and where he sells his soul to the devil at the crossroads. So whenever you see crossroads symbolism, this is going to be talking about meeting the devil, at the very least meeting the spirit world or whatever is on the other side. So the crossroads is the meeting point between the mundane world and the spirit world.
Yeah, Eric Clapton's biography. He's
There
got the Crossroads Rehab Clinic
and voodoo. Obviously, crossroads is huge in voodoo. So that's perfect little gift to give a little girl, I think. Right.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
From a demon underground gives you a book of the crossroads. That's innocent.
Oh.
But I did notice in one scene where she goes on her first quest, she's dressed like Alice in Wonderland. Did you notice that?
Yeah.
She goes into the tree just like Alice in Wonderland. She goes into the roots of the big tree, which is the passageway to Wonderland, the other side, Neverland. Take a pick, right?
Yeah, and they do that in Peter Pan as well. Remember, Peter fits the tree around the Lost Boys so that they can descend into their underworld hovel. I mean, she's obviously like this because the context of the movie makes it so that she has this other world, because number one, she's a child and she's naturally going to go play in the woods and she's going to have her imagination world. But it's tempered by the fact that number one, they're in the middle of a literal war. So going out into the woods is dangerous because it becomes a war zone in the film. It becomes a war zone. And because there's a war zone in her heart with her missing father and her mother taking her up there to this man. And then there's a war zone in terms of the way that the father guy makes war on her. Right. I mean, literally what happens in the film, she's a victim of like 3 types of war. And so of course she goes out into she has this other world where her imagination takes her, and that becomes her new world. And it takes over. I mean, well, the thing with the root, right? Like screaming in the fireplace, which we'll get to, right? She's creating like these magic totems, right, for the birth of her baby brother.
Uh-huh.
Um, where she's melding the spirit world and the natural world, and natural world, not just naturalistic, but like the natural fauna and flora, right, of the labyrinthine world outside. So it splits her right into this personality where she doesn't know what's real and what's not. I guess
Right.
is the point of the film.
Yeah. And the book um has like foreshadowing too. So like you said, it comes from her own psyche, and there's a scene where she opens it up and there's nothing on the page, but then it starts to like bleed.
Yeah.
And that's like the night that her mom died in childbirth,
Mm.
right?
Yeah. It bleeds inky black
Mm-hmm.
on the page.
Mm-hmm. Just like the Mockin book was talking about.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So the second thing that she has to do for the demon faunus underground is go see the Pale Man.
Oh my gosh, this is the worst part.
That's probably the most memorable creature of the movie because he is super creepy. He's like disgusting. He's uh, soggy.
He's soggy. Yes, he is. He's squunchy and
Saggy and
wet and saggy
soggy
and soggy.
and gross.
Yeah,
And he, depictions of him eating children look a lot like Goya's Kronos.
they do. Yeah, I'm sure that was purposeful. Yeah.
Yeah. And so she has to make a portal in her room with the chalk, just like a
Yeah.
magic circle or spell. And then she is in his lair, and she has to steal something from him with a dagger
Yeah.
or something. What was it?
Yeah. She creates a door in the dark or a portal, just like in Beetlejuice.
Mm-hmm.
A door into the other world or
Mm-hmm.
back to the real world. But yeah, that one scene is why, honestly, I avoided this movie for so many years because it's just so, what's the word? Not vascular. It's so like
Unsettling.
it's an unsettling movie. And I also avoided Hook, but for different reasons. I know we're gonna get to Hook later, but like I just really don't like that movie at all. I cannot stand that movie. But it's for different than this, which is like the overt, just gross
Visceral.
phantasmagoria.
Is that
Yeah,
the word you
it
said?
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's visceral phantasmagoria straight from
Yeah.
Guillermo's like twisted, child mind or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But
Well,
yeah,
if
the
Dan was
waking
visiting
up,
you every night, coming out from behind your grandfather clock, how would you grow up normal, right?
right? The waking up, like the creak, right? And he's got puts the eyeballs in his hands, and when the fairies are circling around his head, and like you were just saying, the Kronos imagery of eating the fairy. It's just, oh my gosh! And then chasing her down the labyrinth like halls, and you're like, oh my god, please make this doorway into the
I
ceiling. Like, get
know.
out of here.
You just gave me chills again. Ugh.
Yes.
So the test was she wasn't supposed to eat anything from his table because they wanted to know that she did not have any attachments to the physical
Right.
world because they were trying to bring her into the spirit world, and she has to be able to let go of all of that.
That part was so annoying. It's like, don't eat the pomegranate, right? I mean, and you're going, and she picks the grapes, right? So she's don't eat the pomegranate. Don't taste of the don't pluck the apple off the tree. Just
Yeah,
don't do it. And
yeah.
it's like she eats it and like savors it, and the fairies are like literally like, don't do it, don't do it, and she's like swatting them away, and you're like, oh my gosh, you kind of lose sympathy at that point.
Oh, totally. It's like, it's ridiculous because
Yeah.
he literally said like 5 minutes ago, whatever you do, don't eat anything. And she's like, oh, I'm just going to eat something. Like,
Right. And they got food up in that cabin,
yeah.
right? They're eating their, what are they got tapas up there.
Right?
Right.
They got
Don't eat the
sangria.
damn grape. Don't eat the damn grape when the skin man is at the head of the table right there. Why would you eat the food?
I know. It's so gross. But it is very much like Eve,
It is.
the
Yeah.
temptation of Eve. So she fell and she awakened the child eater.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what they call him? They call him the pale man, right? But he's
Well,
like,
yeah.
yeah, he's a
What
child
is it
eater.
in What is it in Spanish? I'm gonna look it up real quick. I'm sure it's much more lyrical.
So Ophelia gives into temptation. Oh, and her name comes from Shakespeare too. So there's another.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Oh, speaking of which, I'm in the middle of I don't know if it's a Hurricane Ophelia right now, synchro.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I think of Hamlet's Ophelia or Jim Morrison's Ophelia. Ophelia leaves sodden and silk, chlorine dream, mad stifled witness. The angel man finally claimed his benevolent soul. Yeah. So she's Ophelia in the movie, which is already foreshadowing a sad ending for her. It's different than Ophelia in Hamlet.
Right. So then what happens? Then the baby's born. Mother dies in childbirth, and the stepfather is a heartless general or captain who just wants a male descendant. Right. And they did flesh out his character a little bit. Like, he didn't even care about the mom.
Right.
Because at that dinner scene, the mom was trying to tell him their romantic story, and he's like, shut up or whatever. He just totally invalidated her.
Yeah.
In front of everybody. What? Yeah.
Can you see? Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, it's nasty. It says he's a pale-skinned humanoid monster.
Ugh, foggy.
El hombre palo or something. I don't know what he's called. But yeah, so the mother is a vessel. yes, el americano non fatto. No, el non gordo. So she's a vessel, right?
Yeah.
She's a vessel for him, for his, and they say, how do you know it's going to be a male baby? And he's like, basically like, don't let it be anything other than that.
Yeah.
Right. And
he actually says, don't F with me.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. He's like, what if it's a girl? Don't F with me.
Yeah. Okay. Oh my gosh. Yes. Don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't with this guy.
Right? Oh, dude, what he did to the mountain people who are collecting rabbits, that was really disturbing. Talk about scenes that you just like cannot.
Yeah. Body shock horror and it's literally, I mean, he caves in the guy's face.
Yeah.
Right. So, which plays into, with the Mackin book, right? Because it's always about the facial expression. And he destroys the guy's face, even his very appearance. And the guy's dad is right there, and he's like, "You killed my son," and then he kills the dad, but he does, he's going to do that to whomever he comes across, and then he's got his faithful minions, right? Mm-hmm. But then there's the one guy who screws it up, and he's like, "Don't screw it up again." And if you're that guy, you're like, "Oh my gosh!" Like, yeah, don't mess with this guy.
He was like, "Next time, don't bother me with stupid stuff."
Right.
I won't.
He's in there. He's shaving, right?
Yeah.
Everything he does is, I mean, this guy plays a good bad guy, right? You really fear this guy. I mean, every motion that he does is like full of maniacal lethality. It's like the guy could be eating, right? And he's like, reaches for the glass of water, right? Like, is he going for a gun? Oh, God.
Yeah, he's very suspenseful and intense. Like that one guy, I can't remember his name, in the Tarantino movie who played the Nazi at the beginning.
Yeah.
He's very intentional with all of it, and it's scary. Yeah, so the third quest, was it to bring him the baby?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So everyone wants this little male child.
Yeah.
And the faun shows Ophelia the sculpture of him and her holding the baby.
Yeah.
Which I don't know, is this supposed to be like a family tree or just her bringing him the sacrifice, but she brings the baby to him, but then she won't give the baby to him. Right.
Right.
So she kind of has a repentance at the end.
Was this when so before that is when she got the root, right? There's like a root shrub thing, and she
gave her a mandrake root to put underneath.
It's a mandrake.
Yeah, to put underneath the mom's bed so she wouldn't have like pain in the pregnancy.
Right.
And then the dad burned the mandrake, and that's when the mom died in childbirth.
So it's mandragora, as Shakespeare says, and the mandrake, I mean, you know more about this, but the mandrake is not only a kind of a narcotic root used in the Renaissance, but also is full of, it's supposed to bleed when you pull it out of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And then when, of course, the dad, the captain, finds it under the bed, which is actually clever in the movie that they did that, because that is that is that does convey like the actual actions of, I mean, like the Nordics did this. I know this is a practice like in witchcraft, like putting something under the bed, especially when someone's giving birth, because it's near to the person and it's mimicking the baby in the first place. And then he throws it in the fire and you see it screaming and wriggling. It's horrible. So yeah, then so the baby is born, but he also says, like, he says to the doctor, and the doctor is the most noble character in this, right? Because the doctor is treating the rebels, but he's also has to treat the
Captain.
the captain. And we know that he's giving, I don't know what he's giving her. I guess he's giving her like opium or laudanum, something for the pain. And then he gives one of the guys who's tortured, he gives him a tincture, he gives him an injection so that he won't feel the pain. And then, we know that he's working with the maid or whatever in the house he's some sort of not a double agent, but he's working for both. And regardless of, he knows he's probably going to die, but the baby's born. And he said, the captain says to the doctor, if it's a choice between the mother and the baby, save the baby.
Right.
And Ophelia hears this. And then when the baby's born, she takes the baby, into the labyrinth and gives it to and then of course we have him angry with her before that, right? Why would you, I told you not to do this or whatever. I give you a second chance. Right. And then so she is that when she takes it down and then into like a stone circle that literally has a spiral in the stone circle, and she meets the fawn there.
Yeah, and he like wants some baby blood.
Yes.
And she says no.
Yeah, and she's smart enough to know that he's probably lying in terms of what he wants. He says, "Oh, it would be just a little prick, and just a little," and she knows that he's probably lying. And that's when the captain appears. Is that when the captain appears in the circle? Yeah.
And the captain can't see the fawn.
That's right.
Now we are wondering if this girl's having a breakdown or if it's all in her imagination, or she can see things that the adults can't. So it's not really explained, but
right.
The movie has the darkest of all endings.
Does. He's also got a Joker smile. I forgot about that part where the maid cuts him in the mouth and he sews it up.
Yeah.
So he's got a weird, distorted, like demonic smile cut into his face. But yes, the dark ending.
Yeah. And then she ends up, through dying, ends up becoming the queen of the underworld.
Right.
Right. Or the princess. She meets her mom and her dad.
So the Ewoks come out of the woods in Endor and circle Darth Vader.
Yeah.
And shoot him in the head.
And the Care Bears come and they shoot down with their Care Bear stares of love. And it was happy.
Yeah, and then she transcends into the underworld. So her journey is complete, I suppose. What a dark movie.
It is really dark. Very dark and on point with everything that we have been discussing.
Yeah.
Because Pan is the taker. He's the giver and the taker of life and death. Very Shiva character also. Yeah. Anything else?
And it's Peter Pan, because she's a child. She's going on a metaphysical journey outside of the territory of her home. Searching for something else, searching for a Neverland in the underworld, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's always maidens on the cusp of womanhood.
Right
at the age where they would begin their menstruating or whatever and becoming of age to learn about sexual things. So that is when Pan pounces.
Isn't it funny? This one the Goya Award is the Spanish. It's like the Spanish Oscars that it won.
Oh, really?
It won the Goya Award. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Of course.
That's a artist too.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about Peter Pan and Wendy.
Okay.
We threw this one in there for you guys. Yes. Just an extra little nugget. 2023 Peter Pan and Wendy is the live action remake of the 1953 cartoon Walt Disney Peter.
Yeah.
Not awesome. What did you think?
Well, there were things about this that creeped me out, namely Peter Pan.
He was creepy. He was not
Really,
likable at all.
totally unlikable and really creeped me. And it's strange to say that because of the the age of the person who plays Peter Pan. I don't want to be too harsh, but I mean, it really did give me the creeps because he's not likable and because of everything he says and the way that he said. I don't want to say too much, but if you watch the movie, you would know immediately. Hello. I don't even want to imitate. Hello, I'm here to escape your window. I'm here to take you from your window. And you're like, oh no, this is it?
Yeah.
And Tiger Lily plays a much bigger role in this.
Yep.
I like the girl who plays Tiger Lily. I thought she was good.
I always liked the Tiger Lily character. Even in the cartoon, I thought she was real cute.
Yeah. Well, one thing I meant to bring up also is that is the stuff with the weird stuff in real life with Tiger Lily. Remember, Tiger Lily is the daughter of Michael Hutchins and Paula Yates. Michael Hutchins from NXS.
Yeah.
And remember, he died in the same way that we were talking about with Robin Williams and the other people.
Oh, yeah.
And she is the adopted daughter of Bob Geldof.
Uh-huh.
And Bob Geldof, supposedly, there's some Bob Geldof, Jeff Stein, McCaffrey connection.
Wasn't the Peaches girl in the Nexium or OTO? Or
yes. So Peaches Geldof, who's the daughter of Bob Geldof, she died of a heroin OD.
Uh-huh.
And she was she had a Nexium tattoo.
Okay.
And she was in OTO.
Okay.
Is what I read. I used to read. It's funny because, I used to read a lot of, before internet, I guess. I used to read a lot of magazines. I'd read music magazines and music reviews just anywhere. And she wrote a lot of good music reviews for Nylon. Remember Nylon magazine? It's like a woman's fashion magazine, but they had good music interviews in it. Mm-hmm. And I remember her talking about Com Trues.
Uh-huh.
I'm not talking about Tom Coombe, the actual Com Trues, the synth musician.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, she was like a big presence in Hollywood, I suppose, and wrote, fairly decent articles and stuff about music. But then I remember that they said she had an OTO tattoo. I don't know what the truth of that is. Maybe it was just something somebody said in an article, but was also had something to do with Nexium and then died suddenly.
Right.
And I guess she would be the adopted half sister or whatever of Tiger Lily. Mm. And that's interesting because of how Tiger Lily is portrayed. Tiger Lily, by the way, is portrayed in a specifically. There's a lot in the book. I mean, the descriptions of Tiger Lily in Peter Pan, the book, are. It's surprising because. Oh God, I'm never gonna be able to find it. But the descriptions of Tiger Lily in here, in this Peter Pan book, there's a lot of innuendo, like the way that she's dressed. God, I wish I could find the actual quote. The way that she's actually dressed and the way that they describe her, like with her low cut, outfit, and that I'll just sum it up by saying that they portray her fairly accurately in this Peter Pan and Wendy thing, where she's kind of, the actress who plays her in this is like in her mid to late 20s or something. Is supposed to be it's like she's a native because she plays an Indian, in Peter Pan is what they call her, and she's kind of sexy in the movie, and then she saves Peter Pan. So she's an outside character from the rest of it, which is interesting because the rest of it is like we get Captain Hook who's grown, and then we get Peter Pan and them they're children, and then we get Tiger Lily who's supposed to be who's grown.
So it's little brother in the
right.
Yeah.
Right. But I thought that overall this movie was interesting because they did something different with Captain Hook, which is kind of like people talk about how Captain Hook is seen, people it's theorized that Captain Hook is a former lost boy, right? And in this, they really go with that all the way. I mean, Jude Law is he's not likable because he's a villain, right? But there's something in his eyes, and then the resolution of the movie, which is that he's saved by Peter Pan. And not to spoiler alert, but he's saved by Peter Pan, and that he's a sympathetic character. He's in pain, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, he has like his villain origin.
Yeah.
Scene in this. So, yeah, this takes place in Edwardian England.
Mm-hmm.
And the Disney movie was a 1953 movie.
Yes.
And I noticed something. It's Wendy's last night at home as a child. So in the cartoon, they don't really make a big deal about this. They just say it's Wendy's last night in the nursery. But in this one, she's really having a hard time with like having to go to boarding school, and it's her last night at home. And so her wish is actually kind of what summons Peter Pan.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
And so he comes in the nursery, and Tinkerbell's there, and she looks different.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yes. I know. Yes. Yes.
Different. And this is so crazy because I knew that, you know, that scene in the cartoon where she is trying to see if she's going to fit through a little hole and she measures her hips. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
I looked it up because I knew it looked familiar, and it was also in a Marilyn Monroe movie.
Which one?
Gentlemen Prefer Blonde.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
1953. So same year. I don't know who did it first, but Marilyn Monroe measures her hips just like that to see if she can fit through a porthole on a ship, just exactly like Tinkerbell, and the movies were made in the same year.
Walt Disney was like, we're going to put this in all the movies.
Yeah, right. So I didn't catch this ever, but Tinkerbell is the only reason that any of them can fly. Peter Pan can't fly without her.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So she's the one that is like always coming in clutch and saving everybody. And even in this movie. Right?
Well, that's like in what's the one we did last week? Oh, Pan.
Mm-hmm.
Where they're mining for fairy dust, Drino, inside the pineal mountain or whatever.
Yeah.
And so and
dust of immortality in there.
Yeah, and her it must be that her love is what, just like they can fly by thinking good thoughts, I guess her love is what keeps her alive and flying and passes on to the others.
Claps. Wasn't there something about if you clap, you bring them back to life? They didn't put that in this one, but
there's always something about breathing, clapping, and tears.
So I noticed when in the first scene when they all go to bed, it's Tinkerbell that comes in to the bedroom and sprinkles Wendy in the bed, and Wendy floats out of the bed like Exorcist. That wasn't in the first one.
Yeah. So like you were saying, Wendy, it's different in this one because we get a sort of a revisionist context on Edwardian England, right? So instead of the window being open and Peter coming in and searching for his shadow, instead we get Wendy going off to school, which is, it's usually the boys that would be going off to boarding school, but I suppose she's going off to school to learn how to be like her mother. Remember? And she says, what if I don't want to be like you, mother?
Yeah.
You're a grotty little wanker. And her mother's like, okay, all right, fine. Right. Yeah. And she has her little she fights with her brothers, right? She breaks the mirror. I forgot the breaking of the mirror. Nana's in the room and the father comes in. Oh, won't you ever grow up, Wendy? And she goes and she breaks the mirror. That wakes them up. That's the start. That's sort of the genesis of what is going to become her flying away. But then she goes and she hides behind the veil in her room. And then Tinkerbell comes in, sprinkles the fairy dust. Also, it's interesting that I think this is the only one where Tinkerbell doesn't speak. Which is interesting. It's like if they're going to do what they did, but then they're going to take away her voice in the movie. That seems a little odd. Right, in their paradigm, that they're going to do that with the recasting of Tinkerbell, and yeah, when do we meet Peter?
He comes in right after her. So I was going to say, so she's floating out of the bed like the Exorcist, and this is something that I mentioned a couple shows ago in reference to a Beyonce music video called Sweet Dreams. In the beginning, a dove comes and floats above Beyonce, and she floats out of the bed like she's possessed or something. And that's when I was showing you this about how the dove in the OTO.
Yeah.
So all that symbolism they were using in Beyonce, they used it on Wendy. Right. And here again, we have girls coming of age. Perfect time to have a visitation by Pan.
Right.
Right. And he comes in
God.
and takes her away because she doesn't want to grow up yet. And they fly out the window through a portal that happens to be Big Ben. Did you catch that?
Yeah, through the clock.
Yeah. So
just
they fly
like
right
Pan, just like Pan emerges from behind the clock in Guillermo del Toro's hellish night visions.
Yes. And just how we've seen the theme of time and watches and Saturn throughout all of the things we were talking about.
The time portal. Okay.
So, and he says, we're going to go to Neverland where you can be yourself. So where have you heard stuff like that before?
Everywhere now.
Yeah.
Right.
Be yourself.
Yeah, and he's kind of advanced from the squeaky voice that you've talked about in so many other streams. Hello. I can't do it. He's got a squeaky voice.
And she notices after they go through Big Ben through the portal, it becomes the upside down world like Stranger Things. Yeah. And she sees her reflection and everything is topsy-turvy. That came up in Pirates of the Caribbean too.
And y'all are doing Pirates of the Caribbean tomorrow night.
Yeah, tomorrow night.
Mega stream. Yeah, I suppose so. This is supposed to be her flying backwards through time, right? Going back to her innocence when she could be in Neverland. She doesn't want to grow up.
Right. Yeah.
However, right.
When they get to Neverland, in a couple scenes, you can see Saturn in the sky from the Earth of Neverland. Did you notice that?
Right. Yeah. And was it this one that I thought? I mean, the Hook is more. I see a lot of Jeff Stein McCaffrey Island in Hook.
Okay.
This one was slightly different because we don't see do we see a vision of it flying downwards and we see the island? No, we didn't. No, not in this one. No. But yes. Yes, Saturn in the sky. Of course. This movie is so ridiculous, dude.
It took me a minute to figure out who Captain Hook was. Jude Law. He's not.
Yeah.
He's come
Jude Law
since that sex bot in the Spielberg movie. Remember?
Yes.
Joe.
Yeah, in AI.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he's
what do you think about Jude Law?
I don't know. What do you mean?
I don't know. He when he was filming Cold Mountain, I've told this on my channel before, but we had a tape of him. We had a VHS tape of him because when he was filming Cold Mountain, he was in Charleston and he was at a bar and he met my friend and his like fraternity brothers, and they went back to his house for a party, and my friend had a camcorder and just set it up on top of the TV and just pressed record. And there's like an hour of footage of just Jude Law like sitting on the sofa talking to everybody, and it's funny because he's hitting on one of my friends at the time, but he was married to Sadie Frost at the time. And during this when this was happening, it got into late night, and one of their friends like walked. He was in I don't want to say too much, but he was in a room with a girl, and he walked out, and you can hear him walk out of the room, and they go, "Hey, Jude Law's here," and he goes, "Who the fuck is that, man? Give me a beer." And Jude Law's like, "What? This guy doesn't know me?"
Yeah.
And he walks back in and shuts the door.
That's awesome.
But yeah, I thought Jude Law was interesting in this because, a lot of the Captain Hooks that we see, like with Dusty Mothman, is totally creepy to me, and just creepy. But Jude Law, when I was watching this, I thought there's something in this that makes this guy likable. Like he doesn't I don't know a person's heart, whether he has love in his heart, but he seemed to be more normal, if that makes any sense when I was watching it. I don't know if that's just me reading into the
Well,
movie,
you're
but
supposed to have a little sympathy for him,
right.
right? He did have two different colored eyes, I
He
noticed.
did. He did. Yes, he had a left eye marble glass eye.
And there was a scene where well, he had black hair and then he got all wet and his like hair dye was dripping. So
Yeah.
they're saying he's trying to fight aging still, maybe.
Right. So Hook, there's a scene where his wig comes all the way off, and he says, "Please provide me with a little dignity." But in this one, I guess it was the hair dye, and also his hook was on a different hand. In this, he had the hook on his. She got the hook hand.
Yeah. So um Jim Gaffigan is Smee,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And come to find out, Hook, well, remember we were talking about fan theories
Mm-hmm.
and that Hook was a lost boy.
Right.
So this is part of the movie now.
Yes, that's the movie.
And they made it canon.
Yes.
And now Hook was the first lost boy, but grown-ups were evil. He tried to escape Neverland because he missed his mom. And he was picked up by pirates and brought back to Neverland. And that's when they started fighting with Peter.
Yeah, and Peter, it says that Peter made him leave, right? Isn't that what he said? Peter made him leave, wouldn't come back, and then later in the movie, that's the sort of the climax of the movie, because Peter returns and apologizes. He says, "I'm sorry for I wasn't a good friend to you." And then he's about to fall off the mast of the ship, and he says, "Think good thoughts." And then Jude Law says, "I don't have any," and then falls into the water. Oh, sad. He doesn't have any good thoughts.
Poor thing.
Right.
It's funny how he goes from being a little boy raised by the pirates to like growing up and being their tyrant, and they all follow him. Like, how did that happen?
Well, I suppose it would be the story of Anakin Skywalker.
Oh yeah. It very much is.
Yeah, going from the beloved, right-hand man of Obi-Wan, right?
Yeah.
Into becoming the worst of the bad guys. Of course, he's not a pirate. Han Solo's the pirate, but becoming the worst of the bad guys, right?
You did say something when you were texting me. You were like, Order 66, execute Order 66, because he did do that. He like ordered the children to be executed.
Yeah. Which is what Anakin does in the second one, Attack of the Clones. He goes back into the temple.
Yeah.
And issues Order 66, eradicates all of the Jedi kids.
Yeah.
Wasn't that weird that they included that line?
Yeah.
Issue Order 66.
I mean, 66 is, right?
Yeah.
The number of the Qliphoth. So Hook has an origin story just like Anakin. Tinkerbell, again, the real MVP. She helps Wendy escape the walking the plank, and Wendy flies up, and they're like, he has the boy's magic. And Wendy's like, this magic is from no boy. So there's some like strong woman talk.
That's right.
In this, with Tinkerbell and Wendy teaming up, and when Peter's not there yet.
Right. Walking the plank to jump into the chasm, right, into the abyss. But I didn't hear a splash, right? They didn't hear a splash. And then the whole ship floats because of her Tinkerbell magic. Yeah. Also, the sea shanties in this were of note. The lyrics to the movie was directed by David Lowery. Not David Lowery from Richmond, Virginia, who was a part of the band Cracker. Hey, 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 like me and Stone. That song from the 90s. It's a different David Lowery, and Camper Van Beethoven is his other band. But David Lowery, who directed The Green Knight last year. Have you seen his reboot of The Green Knight? It's an A20. Of course, it's an A24 movie. So the ship floats, and that's when Peter Pan appears. Peter's lost his ability to fly as well.
Because he had no pixie dust.
Right. Right. So, but who ends up helping him is Tiger Lily with her native spirit riding on the white horse, and then he does an extreme jump off of the cliff onto the ship, tears into it with his little sword, right?
Yeah.
And then befriends Captain Hook, or issues this call of friendship rather than fighting him, which is interesting.
Yeah.
An interesting revision of the whole thing.
They have a redemption arc for both of them.
That's right. Yeah. Right. And it ends on a positive note, right? It ends on they're probably hoping for a sequel, right?
Well, it ends, they take the Lost Boys back. Okay, so they have to flip the ship because they're in the mirror world, or the upside down, or universe B, as they like to call it in esoterica. Just like in Pirates of the Caribbean, how they get out of the spirit doldrum world, they have to flip the ship opposite. And they all go back home, and the Darlings adopt all the Lost Boys. Oh, did you notice one of the Lost Boys was a slow boy?
Yes, I did.
Down syndrome?
Yes, it was the first starring role for a beautiful slow boy in a Disney film.
I don't mind it.
Yeah.
I didn't mind it. I mean, one thing I had to say about people with Down syndrome is, like, one time I was watching reality TV, just flipping through the channels at the hotel, and there was this reality show about people with Down syndrome and how they get along and stuff. And I watched this whole thing, and their relationships and their responsibility and how they thought about life, like, they were more based and smart than any other person I've ever seen in a reality TV show.
Yeah. Well, in all seriousness, I mean, Shane Gillis makes a good point, that they're closer to God. Right. They are, they live in a, I'm not trying to paint a broad picture here, but just to say that, I know that we're talking about complex human beings, but, a sense of joy and innocence that is lost in the average adult. Right. So,
but it just blew me away. Like, if you're flipping channels and you see people acting crazy and, they're not our word, then this show full of people who are, and they're so mature, and they're so responsible, and they're so well-spoken, and, they're breaking up, and they're just, like, hugging and being like, it's not, it's for the best, and then next channel, people are, it was just a really weird contrast between who you see on reality TV don't have Down syndrome.
Anyways. Then you flip channels and you get to Below Deck Mediterranean.
Or like Real Housewives, where they're tearing up the place and stomping and throwing.
RuPaul's Drag Race,
It was a weird contrast. Okay, so beautiful slow boys and Peter Pan, they find out that Peter used to live there at the Darling's house, and that's why he kept coming back to Wendy's house. And then he still doesn't want to grow up, so he floats off to Never Never Land.
And there's a kind of an epilogue, right, where Captain Hook has surfaced, right, and Smee is there, Jim Gaffigan. Look, we survived. And then they look up, and the ship floats out of the clouds, and they look up, and there's Peter Pan above him to save him.
Yep.
He returns for Captain Hook. So
so
it was an interesting movie. I mean,
it had Mila Jovovich's daughter.
Really? Really?
She was Wendy.
Really? That's Mila? Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Didn't it look just like her?
Now that I think about it, it does.
Oh, and one more thing before we go into your favorite Hook.
Yes.
What was I gonna say? It's getting late. Oh, Wendy is also the name of a title, like she's a Wendy. Did you notice that?
No. Oh, right, yeah, in the film, yes. Yeah. She's a Wendy. She's a Wendy figure. She becomes an archetype in their world.
Exactly. So Pan in the last one was an archetype.
Good thing she's not a Wendigo.
Yeah. Those claws. Yep.
All right. So Hook,
That's
should we go on?
Tiger Lily calls her.
Oh, yes.
Calls her Wendy girl. Okay, so now, last but not least, your favorite.
Yeah.
1991 Hook.
Gosh, I really don't like this movie.
Robin Williams, Dusty Mothman, Maggie Smith.
Gwyneth Paltrow.
What is she?
Gwyneth Paltrow plays the young Wendy, young Maggie Smith. It's one of her first film roles, and Gwyneth Paltrow's godfather is Steven Spielberg. Remember, he gave her away in marriage.
Oh yeah.
Also Jimmy Buffett, David Crosby, Glenn Close.
Yeah.
Phil Collins is in this.
Oh yeah.
And all in cameo roles. And the movie is, of course, it has the John Williams score, which does all the heavy lifting in this movie. But it's produced. Do you know who the producer was? Dodi Al-Fayed.
Nuh-uh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know he was in movies at all.
Yeah, he was the producer, and it was also written by the guy who, of all things, I did an analysis of The Last Starfighter.
The
1984 movie. And the writer, or the director of that movie, is one of the writers of this movie.
So if you don't know, Dodi Al-Fayed is the owner of Harrods.
Mm-hmm.
He was the father of Princess Diana's boyfriend. What was his name? Muhammad Al-Fayed?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was the father of the person who died along with Diana in the car crash.
Who continued to say that there was a seaspiracy with Diana's death.
Yeah.
He died recently. He died did he die this year? I think he died recently. Yeah.
I don't know. So beginning of Hook, he's flying a plane because he's scared of flying. So he's this like grown up, and he's got all of the grown up problems. He's cranky. He's fearful. Is he like an insurance salesman?
He's Bain Capital.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he's a not a hedge funder, but I guess he's a hedge funder. But there's a scene where his son is talking to Wendy, right? And when they fly to London, and the son says, when we see a failing company, we go in and we buy them, and if they give us any resistance, we kill them. They're over.
Oh yeah,
they're over as a company. And so he's on the phone. Actually, I meant to get that out. I have the Motorola phone that he uses throughout this.
Oh really?
I still have it. Yeah,
like a flip phone.
Yeah, and he's got the little. There's so many scenes that they should have cut in this movie, but one of them is when he's in the office with his friends, and they do like a gunslinger draw, like of who can answer the phone the fastest. Right.
Yeah.
And he's always on the phone. He's heading some company, and he's starting to speculate in real estate, and he's starting this children's wing of an orphan hospital named after when it's called the Wendy Moira, Angela So Wendy Mary Angel Darling is her name. And they're starting this wing of this hospital. And Wendy is the grandparent, plays his grandmother or something in this?
No, she's his wife's.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Aunt or something like that, right?
They call her grandmother. So I guess it would be of the kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, the kid's grandmother. Okay, but it still didn't make any sense. But yeah, so he's flying the plane, or he's not flying the plane, but he's in the plane. I was surprised they didn't use Oceania Airlines that they always use in the movies.
So now I'm confused because was he adopted?
Yes.
So she's part of that.
So Wendy adopted Peter Pan when she because he talks about he kept going back and she kept getting older.
That's right.
And so she couldn't fly anymore. And I guess that's at the point where she adopted him.
And he fell in love with her daughter.
Right. So time had passed. So she had grown older, but he'd stayed the same. So then when he starts to grow older, there's a time distance. So then he falls in love with the daughter. Okay. Yeah.
So I forget how does he end up in Neverland?
So he goes away on they're in America, right? And they have the baseball game. And the son is going to play the baseball game, and he says, oh no, first it starts off at the play. They're watching a play of Peter Pan, and the youngest daughter is in the play, and the son is watching it with Robin Williams and the mother, and he gets a phone call. Yeah, so the business is, and she's like, put away the phone, And then the son has a baseball mitt and a baseball, and he says, I'll be there tomorrow morning for the business deal. And then the son says, what about my baseball game, Dad? And he says, my word is my bond. Of course, he breaks his word. Because the next morning they have the baseball game, the son is there, and Robin Williams goes off to the short meeting, which ends up this, is this long business deal or whatever. He sends his cameraman to film the game, and then by the time he shows up, the game is over. By the way, the game it's obviously warm outside because they're playing baseball, but they threw in winter's special or whatever, and I guess that's because they premiered the movie in December. So they had to make it a Christmas movie. And it's also, did you notice this? The name of the league is called it's called the Date Nut League. Very weird.
No.
It's something weird that I saw in there that plays into a lot of the Jeff Stein McCaffrey stuff in the film. Because there's a lot of it. And so then anyway, they miss the baseball game. Then they get on the plane and they fly over to London because he has to dedicate the new wing of the hospital. When they're on the plane, the son is throwing baseball he's trying to crack the window of the airplane. And Robin Williams says, why do you have to always act like such a child? And the kid says, well, I'm a child. And then he hits the thing and the oxygen masks come down. They get mad. Then they get to London. They go to Wendy's house and then they put the kids to bed. The baseball is missing. The daughter says, the kid says, who took my baseball? And she says, the weird man that keeps appearing at the window.
Oh, yeah, which is Hook, right?
Right. Yeah. And then they go and they dedicate the hospital wing. Robin Williams is giving a speech, and he says, we're all orphans, or I'm an orphan. And then I guess, how did they get out? The latch for the window, by the way, is a hook. And he wants the kid to keep the window shut, always keep the window shut, which we know from Peter Pan is now that he's an adult, he wants to keep the window shut because he doesn't have to come home again. But the window blows open, and then I guess Hook takes him off to Neverland, and then Robin Williams has to go and rescue them.
Tinkerbell comes for him.
Right. And Tinkerbell is Julia Roberts.
Yeah. Did you notice?
They called her Tinker Hell on the set of this movie. Yeah.
Did they really?
Yes.
Because she was a high maintenance or something?
She was high maintenance diva. Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. Did you notice that in the Disney's Peter Pan and Wendy, the live action one, they're playing Peter Pan in the beginning?
Oh, yeah, in the beginning. Yeah, they're sword fighting. Yeah.
So he's already in their pantheon of heroes.
Yeah.
Which is like right about the time that the actual book was written.
Yeah, so the Peter Pan and Wendy was released on the anniversary of the release of the 1953 movie. And then I guess that is supposed to be an anniversary of when the play was originally produced.
The play called The Boy Who Hates Mothers.
Right? Oh my God. Yes. Yes, I remember that. And the little white bird.
Yeah.
And then in this, they're watching the play. So everyone is aware of Peter Pan, even though Wendy is involved in the actual thing. Oh, there's also the brother, either it's John or Michael, who comes in. He's like, I lost my marbles.
Yeah, it was one of the Lost Boys.
Right. I lost my marbles.
Yeah.
I can't get them back. And then at the end, he gets his marbles. See, I didn't lose my marbles. And he flies away. It's interesting. It ends interesting that the movie ends with the man flying away instead of the kids. So now he's achieved this everlasting youth innocence of flying. And he flies towards Big Ben. It's weird.
So Tink comes and gets Robin Williams so he can save his children. They get to Neverland. The Lost Boys like, where the F have you been this whole time?
Yeah.
He doesn't remember. Robin Williams doesn't remember that he's Peter Pan.
Yeah.
And he doesn't believe any of this. He's just like an old man now.
It takes him an hour and 40 minutes. I timed it.
Oh, to remember?
To remember that he's Peter Pan. An hour and 40 minutes of a 2 hour and 7 minute movie to remember that he's Peter Pan.
But you like his outfit, right? When he like
oh my god. This movie, So it came out in 91. I guess that's probably why I didn't like it, because it came out in 91. And in 91, I mean, I was 11. So I was like, dude, I don't want to see this. I want to go smoke cigarettes or something. I
Yeah.
wasn't interested in this. But it's a Spielberg movie, and there is a thing with like he mentions dinosaurs in the
Mhm.
movie. And then there's the giant, there's the crocodile that kind of looks like a dinosaur. So Jurassic Park is on the heels of this movie,
Yeah.
I guess. But I just didn't like. I get the creepy crawlies when I see this human man child who's he's. I like Robin Williams because I like Good Morning Vietnam. I like his role. I mean, I think he's awesome in that. But this movie is like he's a man. And
Yeah.
he's there with all these kids, and he's wearing. I mean, Dustin Hoffman even says like, "Oh, you still fit into those tights," right?
Yeah.
And he's like, and it's just weird. It's like Uncanny Valley or something. Looking at his face, hanging out with these guys. There's also my other big problem is with the movie is there's too much kitschy. Oh, we're going to do this. We're all going to clap at the same time, right? We're all going to have sayings that we say at the same time, and then they fit in all the
Bangarang.
the bangarang and then
Rufio.
Rufio, and it's like they all say it 3 times. It becomes this weird hypnotic thing, and then also clearly Spielberg was like, "Oh, it's 1991, so we got to appeal to kids in this, so we're going to have skateboarding and basketball."
Right.
And it's like the Bones Brigade shows up and is like skateboarding, the Lost Boys, and then you look at the set and it's like the guy's like windsurfing like on a track. It's just there's a lot of contrived stuff. Spielberg said that he hates this movie.
Oh, really?
Yes, he made the movie and he says, it's a bad movie.
What do you think about it being called Hook and not Peter Pan? Why do you think?
Well, I want to give it some sort of light take on it, but the movie is so full of weird spirally stuff.
Mm-hmm.
P-Gate, Jeff Stein McEffery stuff in it.
Yeah.
It's all over the place in this movie. And there's literal spiral symbolism. There's Hook, he says he's his dad now. There's the lizard man crocodile trying to get him. There's the smashing of the clocks.
He's trying to turn the sun.
Yes.
Him.
There's the fact that the son doesn't recognize the dad anymore. Come back, remember your father, and it's like they're lost in a psychic haze of monarch, splitting, all the stuff with the slave slop food fights, multicolored, there's just a lot in this movie. There's so much, I can't even recall it all, but there's so much in the movie that it really, so I think that Hook is like, it's like we're hooking the audience into this thing that we have. I mean, the baseball games, and it's like you got David Crosby and Jimmy Buffett. Jimmy Buffett was on the flight logs. He was, I won't say too much about that because of the thing, but he went to the Jeff Stein McEffery place many, many times.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I don't know, but all I know, he's on there and he played there many times. And David Crosby, who's got all this weird stuff, is in there. Glenn Close plays a man in the movie. Dustin Hoffman is this. He goes beyond creepy and foppish, right? He becomes it's predatory,
mm-hmm.
And
he kidnaps the boy.
Yes.
To make him be his little mentee or something.
Right. So it's like we're going to hook the audience, and also this is about hooking people into staying, and the like we mentioned last week, the kids are there on the island and they're living forever in innocence and youth, but also the pirates are there. And at one point, remember Maggie Smith, she says, "What have you been doing?" And that's when the son talks about the hedge fund stuff. And she says, "Oh, you've become a pirate."
Mm.
So he's grown up to become a pirate. He's a financial raider.
Mm-hmm.
And yet he's going back to this island so he can have, innocence forever.
Mm. What were you going to say about the bird's eye view of the island? Because I remember like a compass or something.
Yeah.
Wasn't it?
Yeah, there's a compass. And I was trying to see if there was anything else with the compass. Like as if it were Rosicrucian or something. I'm sure that plays into it. But it's like we see this God's eye view of the island. And I just can't help but think of Jeff Stein McEffery Island
Mm-hmm.
because of all the kids are there and he's flying down into this place and he's wearing tights. And
Well, how many kids do you think that they took there telling them we're going to go to Neverland or
Mhm. Yeah, and the original idea to play Peter Pan was in this movie, who Spielberg wanted in the 80s was who he wanted to cast.
who?
Michael Jackson.
Oh,
Yeah, there were like two big pushes to get Michael Jackson to play this role. And then of course Michael Jackson ends up with Neverland Ranch.
right.
He wants to, which I think is some sort of MK Ultra facility. I mean, it's
Yeah.
but there's you can watch this movie and you can look at every second of this movie and there's something in it where you go, oh no. There's all these little lines that they say. There's the Dustin Hoffman line where it's so out of context. It sounds he's like, I remember you being a lot bigger, and he says like, oh, I don't even want to say what he says, but it's very weird. It's very weird how he responds to that.
So,
And then there's a part where he's on the phone talking to the guy at the end, and he's like, oh, I'm just crawling up a drain pipe. I've been on fairy dust. And how does it feel to fly? And he throws the phone out the window. But there's another line that he says there that's very weird.
uh-huh.
So it's almost like the movie functions as a fantasy for these people.
You know what I've noticed in kids' movies is like the dialogue is really inappropriate if you're not watching what they're doing.
Yes.
I'm trying to think, what was that movie with The Rock that just came out? Jungle Cruise?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a scene that they're talking, the dialogue sounds like a sex scene. Like push it harder and stuff like that. But they're trying to do something innocent, but what they're saying does not fit exactly that, and it sounds dirty. Have you noticed?
Yes. And I would say that, okay, look, there has to be a point where we can't, as adults, we can't take everything as innuendo, because then it almost functions as like, okay, now we're the ones being childish when we read into that.
Who has a dirty mind now?
Right, but this is a film. This is like a $200 million film where every single piece of dialogue is written and rewritten, and they know exactly the context, and they have dozens of people to read the script, and they have dozens of people to read over this, and they know what the movie's about.
Mm-hmm.
And look at all the people involved. So it's creepy. I hate to spoil this movie for anybody. Look, if you, I'm not trying to spoil. If anybody's watching and they loved the movie when they were a kid, that's fine.
Yeah.
Right. I'm just saying we're looking at it in terms of the symbolism and in terms of you can't help but look at some of the darker things with this, especially what we've just discussed with Pan. I mean,
well, yeah, I feel like I do that a lot too. Like I spoil everything. Like I've just ruined Peter Pan for everyone.
Well, but listen, if honestly, I mean, if you were watching this and you thought, okay, that spoils it for me, but then also you have to have discernment. Yeah. And you have to have your own method of going through things and deciding what you think is good or not, right? So, we're just looking at it. Mm-hmm. We're just discussing it. So hopefully it didn't, be happy in your memories of the movie, I guess.
I think you're making some really good points. You can't know until after the fact exactly what's happening. Like you said, like the pizza heads and the Jeff Stein Island and stuff. It's like that was probably their heyday. That the 90s.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I rewatched Jurassic Park the other day, and I was thinking of doing an analysis on it because, I read the book when it came out. I was a kid, and I read it when it came out, and it's dinosaurs, and and you watch the movie, but there's a lot of Jeff Goldblum, when you go back and watch the movie,
totally.
Wouldn't it be sexy if we had a velociraptor? And it's very weird.
Right? He's a sexy math-catician.
Right. And like, who can afford to go to this island where there's dinosaurs and there's the most dangerous game?
Right.
It's almost as if the old guy, who's kind of a Jeff Stein McEffery character, planned the whole thing to be a most dangerous game. Why is Wayne Knight the scientist on the island in the tropics. You think that guy is going to go to the tropics?
Yeah.
Right.
I did a whole thing on Jurassic Park when I was talking about that show, if dinosaurs are real or not.
Mm-hmm.
So in the beginning of that, we talk a lot about Michael Crichton. And yeah, you're right to do a Jurassic Park, because that whole franchise needs a in-depth analysis, because it goes weird places. Chimeras, DNA splitting, cloning.
Do you remember the part where Sam Neill gives? There's a part at the beginning where they're on the dinosaur dig, and he says, "This is a velociraptor claw," and there's a little kid. They always get these. The casting is very strange, but they get this kid who's like a Benjamin Button. Benjamin Button. Benjamin Britton was a poet. Benjamin Button character, and he goes up and he's like, "What's the deal with the claw? That's stupid." And Sam Neill's like, "Well, if I were a velociraptor, I would take this and slash your." And he goes on this like long.
I remember exactly what you're talking about. He's like, "It'll rip you to shreds." And
yeah, with the claw. Yeah. It'll rip you to shreds. Your guts will spill out, and then you will fester. And it's like, dude, enough.
I know.
You're just on a dinosaur dig, man. Chill.
I know.
And the kid's look is exactly like, the kid looks like, yeah, he like walks away.
Yeah, he totally owned that little kid.
Yes, terrible.
Okay, last question. What did you think of the close-ups of Dusty Mothman in Hook with his? They were doing lots of close-ups of his mustache and his teeth and his mouth.
Yeah, they tied little twine around his mustache, and his mustache has like a mind of its own.
Yeah.
I thought that very weird casting, right? I mean, I guess if you're going to get a creep to play Captain Hook, then you would get. I mean, he certainly looks the part.
Yeah.
But everybody's too old, right? Even for a Peter Pan thing, it's odd. I like the way that it's resolved, because he goes back, because Peter Pan goes back home, and then he realizes, oh no, I have a family. And he goes up into the window and he says, always leave this window open. It's like, and he reunites with Wendy, and then they're a family again. So it's positive at the end, right? And, we see the sun, and it's positive. And then, of course, the old man finds his marbles and flies off into the time portal, which is weird. I guess he's going to go hang out with Jimmy Buffett and Jeff Stein on the island.
That's his name.
What's his name?
Tuttle.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Tuttle.
Yeah, Tuttle.
Right. Tuttle, what are you doing in this house? You don't even live here.
Yeah, right. He was an old lost boy.
I've been living in the walls looking for my marbles for 80 years. I've been watching the family.
Yes. Okay. Well, on that note, I think we have panned all of it.
Yes.
It's all panned out.
We've covered all of it. Right.
Yes, we've done the Pan universe of Pan. Yeah. And I think we've made our point that it is probably not a good idea to be trying to contact spirits on the other side.
Right.
Pan is Baphomet, the hidden god, and we're going to be talking a lot about that more on Rockpin. And the next time you see me and Base Lit Analyzer, we're going to be talking about Washington, D.C.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah, that's right.
Esoteric adventure of our nation's capital, and that's going to be awesome.
Yeah, go on the tour of esoteric architecture in D.C., and this wouldn't be a tour without the Albert Pike statue,
right?
In the brochure.
Giant phallus of Osiris,
right?
On the left.
Yeah, they created a city laid out in a Sephiroth. Interesting.
Yeah, right.
But I think, just as the last word about Peter Pan, I think that, I loved the story as a kid, and I think that it's a book in the canon. It's a classic work because it functions on a number of on multiple levels, and I think it's great that we went into all things Pan, which is again related to this because of all of the imagery, all the symbolism that we've covered. As far as we've done modern poetry, we covered ancient. We covered Ovid, we covered Aleister Crowley, we covered Mack, and we covered everything Pan, all the movies. So I think it takes people, with discernment to look at these things and decide for yourself, adventure novel or something darker. Who knows?
Yeah.
And thank you so much, Jamie. Really appreciate you having
You're
me.
welcome. This is one of my favorite shows. So tell everybody where they can find your stuff.
Yeah, you can find me at Based Lit Analyzer over on YouTube, and I will be back with I don't know what I'm doing next. I've got a lot of sponsor streams to cover. If anybody wants to support me, you can go over to my YouTube channel, look at the About page. You can follow me on Instagram, follow me at Based Lit Analyzer on YouTube. I've got a weekly movie review series coming up with Made by Jim Bob, which will be on YouTube, and then Rockfin. We're covering The Truman Show next Saturday,
Nice.
which is going to be great. And you can also catch me on Boiler Room on Rockfin with the Boiler Room crew, and a bunch of stuff coming up. So thanks, everybody. Appreciate you. Thank you, Jamie.
All right. Thanks. Have a good night.
Peace.